have. But a few of us still know. You gotta be willing to put in the time, make the sacrifices, and the hard choices. The job's got its perks, don't get me wrong. The sweet smell of the morning dew, the way the warm sun and the cool breeze can dance across your skin. But don't think it's a game.
So dumb. Cave exploring gone wrong? Marathon?
Flight attendants prepare for takeoff. Welcome to Scary Interesting, and welcome to some of the most horrifying includes the deepest cave on Earth, the infamous Nutty Putty Cave incident, and much.
Wait, is this the guy that I like to watch?
If you're new here, these stories are anxiety-inducing, so viewer discretion is advised.
Yes! I love this guy! Scary Interesting! He's got 700,000 subs, come on! This guy, how does this guy not have 1 million subs?
Vorovkina Cave, at 7,257 feet deep. Vorovkina Cave is the deepest cave on Earth. The cave is so deep that it takes over 4 days and thousands of feet of rope to descend to its immense depth. And certainly, what would the deepest cave be without a couple of horrifying incidents? These are those stories. On the border of Russia and Georgia is a mountain range known as
Georgia, the country, not the state.
This mountain range is notable for a few reasons. First, it's home to Europe's highest peak, Mount Elbrus, at 18,500 feet. Then, on the western side of the region of Abkhazia is a sub-range of the Caucasus Mountains, known as the Gagra Range. There are some decent-sized mountains in this area as well. The highest among them is just over 11,000 feet. But this area is notable for another reason. The Gagra Range is primarily a limestone mountain range carved out by rivers.
Limestone's a relatively weak rock,
the
right?
prehistoric rivers created a bunch of deep canyons and the largest caves on Earth that are currently known. In fact, the Gagra Mountains are home to 4 of the deepest caves anywhere on Earth. The deepest of these is Vorovkina Cave at over 7,000 feet deep. For on top of one another. The entrance to Vorovkina Cave is also located at an altitude of 7,500 feet, meaning that you have to climb up a literal mountain to get to it. Once you're up there, you're still surrounded by the rocky cliffs of the mountain ranges, and then in the middle of these cliffs is a fairly unremarkable looking hole in the ground. It's obvious that it's the entrance to a cave, but you never expected to descend for over a mile into the earth. When the entrance was first discovered in 1968 by a group of cavers, they only descended down to a depth of 377 feet before returning to the surface. Then in 1983, the cave was discovered for a second time by a separate team of speleologists from the Parevo Speleal Club from Moscow. Over the next 3 years, a series of expeditions pushed the depth to around 1,400 feet, but then for reasons that are unclear, there were no more expeditions until the year 2000. Work resumed again that year, but it would take all the way until 2015 to discover a new shaft that would unlock the true depth of Vorovkina Cave. By 2017, they extended the maximum depth of the cave from 1,400 feet all the way to 7,200 feet and mapped over 17 kilometers of tunnels and passages. Then finally in March of 2018, the official deepest point of the cave was discovered at the bottom of a subterranean lake where the cave meets the water table, giving Vorovkina Cave a total depth of 7,257 feet, or 2,212 meters. 6 months later in September, the and to continue exploring the cave. And this time, they were joined by photographers Robbie Stone and Jeff Wade. It was this same team of world-class cavers from the Parade.
I think I might actually kind of like this.
Descents of
Wait,
Ravkina and of the other team caves in the Gagara mountain range. Led by team leader Pavel Demidov, this expedition would be returning to the bottom of Ravkina Cave to collect samples of some of the potentially undiscovered species and explore some of the promising horizontal passages at the bottom of the cave, all while having Robbie and Jeff.
Imagine getting stuck down there.
Now, in an ordinary cave of moderate depth, where you can descend and ascend in a single day, you'd still be bringing a decent amount of equipment because you need food and a bunch of climbing gear for every single person on the team. In caves as large as Ravkina Cave, the descent is more similar to an expedition that you'd expect to see when climbing a tall mountain. If you've ever watched anything related to Mount Everest, you may have heard of the multi-camp system. These camps are established higher and higher up the mountain to store food and gear, and for the climbers to sleep and stay in between climbing. For multi-day expeditions on a mountain or in a deep enough cave, the amount of gear becomes way too much to transport at a single time. People have to climb up and down in advance to transport load after load of the necessary equipment to ensure a safe attempt. And Ravkina Cave is no different. In fact, because of how deep it is, it has a total of 6 camps at various depths on the way to the bottom. From the entrance, climbers have to put on special clothing, harnesses, and helmets fixed with headlamps. They then descend down the first shaft into the darkness and move through a series of tight tunnels and passages to reach the first camp at 2,000 feet. This camp is a permanently installed camp where gear and equipment are stored year-round for emergencies. Then, over the course of the next 4 days, Robbie, Jeff, and the Prevo Speleo Club made their way to Camp 6, all the way down at 6,900 feet. On their way, the temperature was just a few degrees above freezing. They crawled through mud and water, impossibly tight squeezes, and descended down 100-foot shafts over nothing but air. The thousands of feet of ropes that they used to make the descent were their only means of transportation in and out. Then, finally, they set foot onto the flat, sandy Camp 6 set up in a large horizontal tunnel. This would be their home for the remainder of the expedition. Over the next 3 days, the team set out from their camp to complete all of the tasks they had intended. One of these was to bring Robbie and Jeff to the lake that sits at the bottom. When they got there, they were stunned to see this beautiful turquoise water surrounded by jet black limestone. The lake is 50 feet long, 25 feet wide, and is actually 28 feet deep. If not for the lights that they brought, it would sit there in complete darkness, entirely without color. On day 7, everything was still going according to plan, and that day, 2 of the members of the team had to leave early to catch a flight home. When they got up to Camp 3, there was a ton of water pouring into the cave. A massive storm up on the surface had caused a flood pulse to send thousands of liters of water rushing in. Inside these caves, you can't really communicate wirelessly because of the thick layers of rock. So instead, cavers have to run a physical line the entire length of the cave to communicate. The 2 team members immediately tapped to the cable to warn the others about the flood pulse headed their way. Down at Camp 6, they weren't all that worried when they initially got the call. Flood pulses are a common thing that cavers have to worry about. A single milliliter of rain is 1 liter per square meter, meaning that a single square kilometer receives 1,000 liters of water if just a single milliliter of rain falls. Bursts down into caves in equally huge volumes and can last for hours, depending on the volume of rain and how long it rains for. Again, they weren't all that worried when they first got the call. The Prevo group is world-class, and their plan was to monitor the water level and then plan accordingly. Camp 6 had also been set up off of the main vertical shaft in what looked to be an area away from the flow of water. It was also at 6,900 feet, whereas the total depth was over 7,200 feet. For the water to reach them, it would have to fill up 300 feet of passages below them before it would reach them. About half an hour after they received the call, they heard the first sound of water approaching. It started off as a faint rumble and slowly grew like a train approaching. By the time it was just about to reach camp, it was so roaring loud that it was almost deafening. The entire cave shook like a constant earthquake was going on. Robbie had just started breakfast when the noise really started, and he and the others rushed out of their tents to see the approaching storm. As they turned their headlights towards the vertical shaft, a fire hose of water came pouring down. Robbie stood there with his mouth open and almost dropped the food he was holding. Not nearly as experienced as the Prevo team, Robbie was really concerned about the water rushing in. But again, the spot they were in was completely dry, so he tried to stay calm like his Russian comrades. This was a bit concerning, so they decided to go and check out a nearby siphon to see how much the water table had risen. They returned about 5 minutes later and looked into the hole once again. This time, not only could they see water, but it was rising so fast it was sloshing up around against the walls and almost out of the hole. The team member looked back at Robbie, and Robbie saw that his face had gone completely white. Immediately, he knew that this meant that they needed to leave, and leave right away. With the sound of water still almost deafening, all hell broke loose in the camp. No one expected to be leaving that day, but now everyone was running around packing up essential gear. Robbie and Jeff pulled on their latex suits over their fleece base layer. After that, they slipped on their abrasion-resistant nylon shells and harnesses. Robbie then made the tough decision to leave all of his camera equipment and personal items. Literally tens of thousands of dollars of equipment. He knew he couldn't risk being slowed down, or it could cost him his life or the life of one of his teammates. He pulled all of the memory cards out of the cameras, placed them in a Ziploc bag, and then slipped them into his latex suit. At the very least, he could save all of the pictures he had taken. With that, he called out to the others that he and Jeff would start their ascent, and then they started off the vertical shaft out of the quickly flooding Camp 6. This would be the last interaction they would have with the Russians at Camp 6. The remaining members of the Prevost team would wait for the team leader, Powell, before starting their ascent. As Robbie and Jeff made their way to the vertical ropes, they reached a narrow traverse, almost like a bridge that went along one wall. Prior to the flooding, the chamber beside the bridge was 60 feet deep and 25 feet wide of nothing but air. Now it was almost completely flooded, almost coming up over the side of the bridge. At the end of this narrow traverse were the vertical ropes and the source of the water. Okay. Robbie stepped into the water, coming down from the shaft, and clipped his ascenders to the rope. Then he put his head down, took a deep breath, and started making his way up the rope as the water pummeled him from above. The water was coming down so hard it felt like it was crushing and suffocating him. It was literally as if his head was being squashed into his shoulders. Thankfully, he was able to tuck his chin, which allowed the water to run off his helmet and create a small air pocket for him to breathe. Focusing on just the white rope directly in front of his face, he moved his ascenders up rhythmically as fast as he could. Finally, he reached an area with a small outcropping that he could step on and out of the waterfall to look up. He saw that the rope was coming out of a shoulder-sized hole in the rocks, but this was also the source of the water. Coming out of this little hole was a fire hose of water that seemed to take up the entire space. He thought to himself that there was no way he was going to be able to make it through that intense downpour. At the same time, he couldn't just stop. He was the lead climber. Everyone else was coming up behind him, and there was no telling what the water was like down below. He had to at least try to make it through. When he got to the hole, the force of the water was so strong that he was only able to push his ascenders a couple inches at a time. He finally made it through the squeeze and then realized that Jeff would have to do the same thing. He had no idea whether or not Jeff would be able to make it, so he just kept climbing as high as he could to get out of the way. In his panic, he hadn't realized that this new section of the cave was mostly dry. The water flowed down a different route to the squeeze, so he was relatively safe where he was. But because he was so full of adrenaline, he was mindlessly climbing for his life as fast and as high as he could. He only finally realized what he was doing when Jeff yelled out to him to slow down. Snapping out of it, he stopped and waited for Jeff to catch up before they continued. When Jeff reached him, his face was white, his eyes were wide, but he exclaimed that they were at least alive. The two of them silently wondered if the same could be said for the Prevost team down below. Robbie and Jeff eventually made it up to Camp 5 at 6,200 feet, where they waited, hoping they would see the Russians any minute. As the cave continued to shake around them, they occasionally looked down over the edge into the abyss. Miraculously, down below they saw a single headlamp slowly making its way up the shaft. When he was finally close enough, they realized it was Andre. After he climbed up into camp, they asked him if he had seen the others, and he just shook his head silently. They all sat there, thinking about the worst-case scenario. Down below, by the time Pavel had returned from the siphon, the bridge that Robbie and Jeff had walked across was completely submerged. The rest of the team members had to actually swim to reach the vertical ropes. The last to swim out was Pavel, and as he was making his way out, the chamber had become a swirling vortex. All of the water draining deeper into the cave had turned into a giant whirlpool. When he went through it, it spun him around, and he had to swim hard to make it to the line. By the time they were ascending, all of the deeper passages were completely submerged in water. Then, 15 minutes after Andre emerged, 5 more lights could be seen making their way up the shaft. One by one, all of the remaining members of the Prevost team made their way up to Camp 5. Robbie watched them ascend out of the flooded passage and couldn't believe how strong and capable they were. One team member was even carrying a stove and 4 sleeping bags attached to his harness. He thought to himself how glad he was that it was him and Jeff that had gone first. If they had been the ones to climb up last, it's likely they wouldn't have survived. And then when they climbed up into camp, they were quickly in the tent, having coffee and laughing about the entire ordeal. Robbie, on the other hand, was still thoroughly freaked out. For hours, he refused to take off his gear and kept looking down into the chasm to see if the water was still rising. 200 feet above them was a horizontal passage that they needed to pass to move higher into the cave. Normally, it's already half filled with water and you have to crawl through it. With all of the flooding, it was completely filled with water. As long as the flooding continued, they were trapped and just had to hope that the water didn't continue to rise higher. Pavel reassured Robbie that they would wait until morning to let the water clear, and then over the course of the next 16 hours at the camp, the roaring of the water slowly died down. The flood pulse ultimately lasted a total of 20 hours and was the result of a week of rain, followed by a single severe storm. The week of rain had completely saturated the ground, so by the time the storm happened, the water poured relentlessly into Varavkina Cave. They later learned from a cab driver that the raindrops from the storm had been the size of nickels. This was actually a good learning experience for the team. They had previously been operating under the assumption that the cave would be flooded in the wintertime. Following the expedition, plans were put in place to improve the surface monitoring to watch for rain. Another camp was installed in the lower chambers to provide another escape point in the event of flooding. And despite this expedition being cut short, they had completed essentially everything they had set out to do. New passages had been explored and mapped, cave species had been sampled, and although the camera equipment was destroyed, all of the pictures were preserved. But this wouldn't be the last accident to ever occur in Varavkina Cave. 2.
Category E, fewer medicines and an HIV pill. Ask your doctor
What's it called?
about 2-in-1 HIV pill.
Caves
2
are a
years
little
later, in
spooky
November of
because, like,
2020, some people
there's so
explored
much
the
can go
area
wrong
as a
in
road
caves.
fixed to the cave's entrance. This is typically a big no-no in the caving world because then anyone can access the cave and potentially get hurt or lost if they're unprepared. 8 months later, on August 4th, 2021, to ever occur in Varavkina Cave. 2 years later, in November of 2020, some people exploring the area noticed a rope fixed to the cave's entrance. This is typically a big no-no in the caving world because then anyone can access the cave and potentially get hurt or lost if they're unprepared. 8 months later, on August 4th, 2021, the same Borrego team returned to continue their work in Varavkina Cave. They descended into the cave as they had 3 years earlier, but then at 1,300 feet they found a pair of crampons and an ice axe. This didn't make sense. This equipment couldn't have just fallen into the cave from the entrance.
Crampons,
there were no straight
tools.
drops to where the equipment was
Someone
found.
died.
This meant that someone had to have come into the cave
Yes.
and deep into the cave.
But
They continued further in, all the way to the permanent camp at 2,000 feet, then to the second camp at 3,200 feet, and then all the way at 3,600 feet. Halfway into the deepest cave on Earth, they found the badly decomposed body of a man. He was wearing camouflage overalls, trekking boots, a helmet, he had 2 cell phones, and he was still attached to the rope that he had used to descend into the cave. By the looks of the decomposition, he had been there for months. Although he had no ID on him when he was found, 37-year-old Sergei Koziv using a missing persons database. Then, using the information from the cell phones found on him, they were able to figure out what had happened that led to his death. Sergei lived in the city of Sochi, Russia, just east of the Russian border with Georgia, and about 2 hours from the entrance to Varavkina Cave. He was an avid outdoorsman and frequently went on solo expeditions to explore the wilderness. On November 1st, 2020, he said goodbye to his family, as he always did when he was going on one of these solo expeditions, and then set off for the Gagra Mountains. He also didn't tell them where he was going, despite the fact that he was heading to a location that fewer people had set foot in than the International Space Station. Based on the documents and screenshots found on his phone, it seems that Sergei had spent almost a year planning this trip. He had printed out maps and materials from the expeditions made by the Borrego team specifically to navigate down into the cave. First, he made the ascent up into the mountains to the cave entrance using his crampons and ice axe. Then he fixed a rope to the opening and descended down into the darkness of Varavkina Cave. Using the information that he had gathered from the Borrego team, he hauled all of his equipment in 3 transport bags through the tunnels and narrow passages. Then, using a lattice descender, he traveled down the massive vertical shafts along low. He successfully
that is not a good idea.
and left some of the equipment later
I I would not go, like, if it's maybe like a mine, maybe I'd go in alone. But 99% of the time, maybe 90% of the time, I would have what we call a buddy-buddy system. Basically, that means that if you get help, your buddy can either help you or go get help. If I imagine if you get stuck there and you're done, you're dead. You can't call for anybody. You can't scream. No one's gonna hear you. You're just screwed. Multiple ways over, you're just screwed.
And then proceeded almost directly to the second camp. It was determined by the excrement found on site that he lived at the second camp for about a week before descending further into the cave. From the second camp, things got a bit more challenging. Beyond that camp, there are some larger and more technically challenging vertical shafts. In addition, the cave becomes significantly wetter from that point onward. As any caver knows, proper equipment is crucial. The standard fleece underlayer with a waterproof outer layer is crucial to survive in the cold and wet subterranean environment. It's unclear exactly what happened in Sergei's last moment, but it seems as though he realized that he wouldn't be able to descend any further through the water with the equipment he had. At which point, he would have tried to make his way back up the cave, but because he had already descended into a technically challenging area, he was unable to get back out. Sergei had brought ascenders for his hands, but he didn't have any stirrups for his feet, meaning that he had no footholds for any of the lower shafts. He must have tried to make his way up the cave through exhaustion, eventually laid down to sleep one last time and never woke up. Upon finding his body, the Bravo team went back up to the surface and alerted authorities. Due to the difficulty of the cave and the depth that Sergei's body was found at, it would take a team of over 100 individuals to eventually retrieve it. It's also particularly risky to be in a confined space like a cave with a decomposing body, because the gases given off from the decomposition process can build up and become toxic at high enough levels. Despite how many people were involved in the rescue, they still ended up having to cut Sergei into pieces to successfully remove him from the cave. After his retrieval, his body was finally returned to his wife and kids in Sochi. For now, Verovkina Cave is the deepest cave on Earth. But the Earth is a big place, and caves are not nearly as readily viewable as their mountain counterparts. Verovkina Cave was only crowned the deepest in 2018. It remains to be seen whether it will hold its place as the deepest on Earth. Six men were exploring the 300-foot deep Cascade Cave on Vancouver Island when something went horrifyingly wrong. This is their story. On the west coast of British Columbia, Canada, is the beautiful Vancouver Island. Home to the province's capital, Victoria, Vancouver Island is the largest and most populated island along the west coast of the Americas. Vancouver Island also has a diverse climate.
Oh my gosh, it's so cool.
In Canada. The temperature in January rarely drops below freezing, and the summer temperatures can reach as high as 33 degrees Celsius or 90.
I like the tires, how they switch.
The interior of the island also has significant mountains, similar to those that are typical of the rest of the Pacific Northwest, and as a result, there are large differences in the amount of precipitation across the island. The interior of the island can see as much as 262 inches, which is the most in all of North America, whereas the eastern tip in the rain shadow of the mountains sees as little as 24 inches. In addition, the majority of this precipitation is during the winter months. In fact, the rainfall during the summer season amounts to less than 1/5 of the rain during the winter season, and if you've ever been to the Pacific Northwest, you're probably all too familiar with the rainy months. At 6 a.m. on December 5th, 2015, Jason Story bent down in the dark over his bed to kiss his wife Caroline goodbye. That day, he would be traveling 80 miles northwest of his home in the city of Duncan on Vancouver Island to explore a cave with 5 friends. He walked out of his house that morning and the rain was coming down steadily, as is the case with most days in the winter months on the Pacific Northwest. Jason was dressed for the wet weather though, not only for the trip there, but also for the conditions inside the cave. He had on some rubber boots, neoprene socks, 3 shirts, overalls, and a water-resistant jacket. He'd also recently bought a helmet with a mounted headlamp for just this occasion. Up to this point, Jason had only been caving 4 times, and the cave that he would be going to that day was going to be his toughest cave yet. Near the city of Port Alberni is a cave known as Cascade Cave. It's dangerous enough that there's a locked hatch covering the opening, and the key to the hatch is only given to groups that sign waivers indicating that they understand the dangers of exploring the cave system.
Sorry.
In addition, the location of the cave is kept somewhat secret within the caving community to ensure that people can't get hurt exploring it or disturb the formations inside of it. The interior of Cascade Cave is about a mile long and descends to 338 feet under the Earth's surface. It's also filled with impossibly tight and winding tunnels that are just barely passable by an adult person. After leaving his house that morning, Jason met up with his friends, Andrew and Adam, who were paramedics,
hell is
and
Bastard's
Zach, who was a chef
Crawl?
and volunteer firefighter.
Dude,
Together,
that
they
looks like
drove
a
to
tight
Port Alberni,
squeeze.
where they picked up the key for the hatch and met up with 2 more friends, Matt and Taylor, who were both computer programmers. Jason was the oldest of the group by about a decade at 43 years old, and the least experienced caver among them. It was his friend Andrew who introduced him to the sport, and if there was anyone you'd want to be your teacher, it was Andrew. Not only was he an expert caver and former cave guide, he had a wiry frame perfect for caving. His job as a paramedic also made him invaluable if anything went wrong during their descents. From Port Alberni, they drove up a forested, parking in a small clearing. After parking, they took inventory of all their climbing gear, which included ropes, harnesses, carabiners, and a small ladder that they would use to descend into the opening of the cave. They also brought a small gas stove, food, water, and a first aid kit containing a Mylar space blanket. If you've never seen one of these before, they look almost like a blanket made out of aluminum foil, and they're excellent at preventing heat from escaping. After checking their gear, they set off into the forest to find the entrance to Cascade Cave. The entrance to the cave is just a small steel hatch in the ground that you could easily miss if you weren't specifically looking for it, which is incredible considering what it leads to. They got to the hatch at about 10 a.m. and reached into the small hole beside it with the key to open the lock. Next, they fixed their aluminum ladder to 2 carabiners near the opening and then fixed ropes to their harnesses to belay one another down the ladder. All of them descended into the cave, and then the last person in closed the hatch and locked it once again. With it closed, the last little bit of light filtering into the cave was now gone. The key was then tied to the bottom of the ladder because if it got lost, there would be no way for them to reopen the hatch and exit the cave. From the surface, the cave descends 30 feet straight down into the first chamber. Now relying on their headlamps, they took their first look around the subterranean abyss that would be their home for the next few hours. It was damp and cold, just barely above freezing, but this is what they expected, so they started down the first narrow passageway from the first chamber. On either side were jagged boulders, and the ceiling was dripping with water from all of the moisture. As they continued deeper into the cave, the dripping water eventually turned into a small stream along the cave floor. First it was up to their ankles, and then up to their shins as they crouched through the narrow tunnels. At around 45 minutes in, Adam decided that he couldn't go any further. He had tweaked his back a few weeks prior, and all the bending over was making it flare up again. He said goodbye and good luck to everyone, and then Matt went with him back to the exit of the cave. Once he was out safely, Matt locked the hatch once again and then rejoined the rest of them to continue further into the cave. For the next hour and a half, they slowly made their way through the narrow passages, crawling and sliding. Inside the cave, the entire group was always within about 100 feet from the first person to the last person, but most of the time they couldn't actually see one another because they were obscured by the rock. Jason was amazed by what he was seeing. There are over 1,000 caves and tunnels on Vancouver Island, and they're all completely unique. Eventually, they made it to the first feature that makes Cascade, which is an area known as Bastard's Crawl. This passageway is too narrow to be able to stand, so you have to crouch down and crab walk through it. It's also a sharp slope downwards, so you have to brace yourself against the ceiling so you don't slip down wet rock. After exiting Bastard's Crawl, they reached the only major waterfall in the cave, known as Double Trouble. The reason that it's called Double Trouble is that the stream coming down through the cave up to that point hits a rock at the top of the waterfall and splits it into 2 streams. The streams then fall 50 feet down into the rocks in a large chamber below. At the top of the waterfall, they set up their rappel lines and then slowly made their way down the wet, slippery rocks into the chasm. The entire time, the water was just spraying down on either side as they tried to keep from slipping on the wet footholds. As Jason was going down, he could hardly believe how hard his heart was beating. He wanted a harder challenge though, and that's exactly what he was getting. After they all finally made it down, they walked a little ways away from the waterfall to regroup for some lunch. They also noticed that it seemed like the water coming down Double Trouble was getting stronger as time went on. Just before 1 p.m. and about 3 hours into the cave, they sat there using the little stove to heat up some beef stew. Although they were 200 feet underground, in the light of just some headlamps, this is exactly what they hoped the day would be. About 20 minutes later, they started moving again, and with only a quarter mile left in the cave, they would be at the end in less than an hour. When they got about 300 feet more, they ate lunch, and Zach started shivering violently. After 3 hours in the cave, a short rest was just long enough for the cold to move in. But because they were almost at the end anyway, they all decided they would turn back together and head for the exit. The group retraced over all the way to Double Trouble and noticed that the sound of the water was a lot louder and visibly the streams were a lot larger. Matt started up the waterfall first, then Arthur would go, then Jason, Zach, and Andrew would come up from behind.
You get 2 times as much corn as you can
There was
soybeans.
also a lot more
The
mud
problem
being
with
washed
corn
into
is
the
that
cave
it's
than
not
was
as
stuck to
valuable.
their feet and their lungs.
How long does corn take to grow in this game?
And with how hard the water was coming down there, it was even more difficult to find footholds on the rock. After Jason successfully made it up Double Trouble, he was wondering how the water had gotten so much stronger so quickly. He wondered how runoff from the rain could be adding so much to the flow of the streams. Beyond Double Trouble, Jason got on his stomach and started pulling himself up towards Bastard's Crawl, and the water was just pelting him in the face. With it barely above freezing, the water
Corn
was
takes
like
6
ice
months.
taking his breath away as he pulled himself through it.
So soybeans.
After making it past the outcrop, he started into another tight passage that split into 2. He paused for a second, not remembering which way to go, and because he couldn't see anyone up ahead, he decided that it would be best to climb back down and ask. As he climbed back down about 15 feet, the water suddenly surged and swept his feet out from under him and knocked him onto his back, completely submerging him in the stream. He quickly tried to stand up, but because of the way that the water was flowing, it was sucking him down and his body was acting like a cork in the passageway.
Oh my god.
He could barely keep his head out of the water, and the pressure was building up around him. If he didn't get out quickly, the water would shoot him out of the passage and over Double Trouble, 50 feet down to the rocks below. He tried to move, but his boot was jammed, and the freezing water washing over him was making him extremely cold and quickly draining all of his strength. Lying on his back, he realized he needed to call for help, but when he did, water just flowed into his mouth, causing him to choke and gasp for air. After 5 minutes of struggling in the freezing water, thinking about his wife and kids, he managed to get out a guttural cry for help. Zach and Andrew finally caught up and realized that Jason was in serious trouble. Andrew jumped into action and rushed over to where Jason was stuck. When he got there, you could barely see Jason's face above the stream of water. He yelled to him to keep his head above the water and started trying to pull him out, but between the tight space and the rushing water, it was incredibly difficult to get any leverage. Jason was also so weak at this point, and the water was so loud he could barely communicate with Andrew. So Andrew started shouting specific instructions at Jason, guiding his hands and feet to stable positions so that he could help to pull him out. When he started pulling him out, though, the water washed over Jason's head and forced him back into the recess once again. They started the process over with Andrew shouting specific positions and Jason struggling through the torrent. Eventually, Andrew managed to grab hold of his arm and ripped Jason out from the torrent of water. When Jason finally emerged, he was wide-eyed and gasping for air, barely able to get out any words. Although they were out of the worst of it, they were still almost submerged in the stream of water. Andrew encouraged Jason to keep moving, but he was in rough shape and wanted a moment to catch his breath. Andrew knew, though, that they need to keep moving because every second spent in the water is another second closer to hypothermia, and the flow of water was still getting stronger by the second. Finally, Jason managed to pull his leg free, and they were able to move further into Bastard's Crawl. Once it was clear that Jason was safe, Andrew told Zach to stay with Jason while he went up ahead to grab their bags. About 15 minutes later, he returned with a supply bag containing the mylar blanket and immediately wrapped it around Jason. He told Zach the water was way higher and rushing a lot faster, so he should go up and join the others and tell them what happened. If he and Jason weren't behind them in 30 minutes, they should leave the cave and alert search and rescue. He also knew that if for some reason he and Jason weren't able to exit that area, there wasn't enough room for 3 people to stay. He then used the gas stove to heat up water and poured it down Jason's clothes to warm him up. Although he didn't have the water to actually check,
of course, I really want this bad
Jason
boy.
was likely stage 2 hypothermia. He was so cold he had actually stopped shivering, and all of the color had drained from his face. Thankfully,
Actually, not as big as I thought it'd be, like 16 million.
Jason slowly regains color and was eventually warm enough to try to
This one was like 400,000.
From where they were, under normal
You know how much these things smell when you get rotten grain near them?
Fight the rushing water with every step. The final section of Bastard's Crawl had just a 4-inch space between the water and the ceiling. This meant that they wouldn't be able to crawl through it and keep their head out of the water. With that, Andrew knew that they had to turn back and wait until conditions improved, while also hoping that the water didn't fully submerge the cave. After climbing back down, they found a mostly dry ledge jutting out at a 45-degree angle with just enough room for both of them. The stream running through the cave sprayed the ledge on the outer edge, and so Andrew had Jason go on the other side to stay dry. Andrew then braced himself on the ledge as well and made himself comfortable for the long wait. Subterranean caves can have little microclimates different from the conditions on the surface. Inside Cascade, the torrent of water was moving so fast that it was actually losing on the ledge, and eventually the water was so high that it was just a few feet from where they were sitting. It was now 6 p.m. and they were still 200 feet underground, huddling together under the mylar blanket. It had also already been 3 hours since Zach left, and they had no way of knowing whether or not their friends had made it out of the cave. It's possible that the rest of the cave had been blocked up by water, or someone else had gotten stuck or injured, or even worse, it was possible that no one made it out and no help was coming. Thankfully, though, the rest of the group did make it out of the cave, and after driving into an area with cell service, contacted search and rescue teams at 9 p.m. Rescuers immediately went into the cave to try to reach the trapped men, but the water level was too high and moving too quickly. They would just have to hope that the water wasn't filling up the cave entirely, and the 2 men had found some sort of shelter deeper into the cave. Inside the cave, Jason and Andrew kept their headlamps off to conserve the batteries, and so they sat there in complete darkness, wondering if anyone was coming to help them. Hours went by, and the water slowly crept higher and higher. They couldn't sleep because the 45-degree angle they were on would mean that if they didn't focus on keeping their footing, they would slip off the ledge and into the water. Throughout the night, they would check in with each other every 20 minutes or so, and then finally, at 5 a.m., the water looked as though it had started to recede. They waited just a little bit longer to make sure it was safe, and then made another attempt at an exit. After sitting in the exact same position for 12 hours and without sleep, it was incredibly difficult to get moving again. Over the course of 90 minutes, crawling on all fours and wading through water up to their chest, they finally made it close enough to the exit
Now,
to see lights off in the
cost me
distance.
$500,000.
They called out to the rescuers, and one rescuer called back, "I love you," in sheer
Oh,
relief at the sight of the
$600,000.
men.
Cool.
After almost 24 hours trapped in Cascade Cave, they fixed their harnesses to the belay rope and slowly climbed the aluminum ladder towards the
14,000.
surface.
Only 900 liters less, but it's got the best horsepower, and that's why I'm
Just as
interested.
they finally poked
Plus
his
it's
head
black, and I
through
like
the
black
shaft.
harvesters.
The following year, on May 7th, the group of men returned to Cascade Cave to retrieve some of their equipment and to get redemption for their failed attempt. They parked in the clearing once more and made their way to the steel hatch. Since their descent the year prior, no other groups had gone to the cave, and so they had to brush off the dirt that was now covering the entrance. Andrew reached down and unlocked the hatch as he did the year before, the ground much drier than their last attempt. They fixed their harnesses, their rope, and the aluminum ladder once again, and Jason descended back into the cave that almost took his life. As they moved their way through the cave this time, the torrential stream from the year before was just a tiny trickle of water. Instead of wet, slippery rocks, they had rough, dry handholds, making it much easier to make their way through the cave this time. After the harrowing ordeal from the year before, the group successfully made it out of Cascade without incident.
We all love doing things for our pets. We give them their chores while they supervise ours. We help them look their best. We entertain them. And when we really want to spoil them, we take them to Tractor Supply for everything they need. The food, the treats, the toys. And when you've had a busy day, no problem.
Tractor Supply, for the pets we love out here.
Yeah, pretty good store.
You see this black box right here? Well, I'm going to show you something right now. Some people are...
Through the cave this time, the torrential stream from the year before was just a tiny trickle of water. Instead of wet, slippery rocks, they had rough, dry handholds, making it much easier to make their way through the cave this time. After the harrowing ordeal from the year before, the group successfully
How much
made
is
it out
that
of
sound
Cascade
again?
without incident. John Jones was exploring the famously tight Nutty Putty Cave in Utah.
Oh no, Nutty Putty. It sounds like a cute little silly name, but Nutty Putty is one of the most notorious caves in all of caving. It is super duper tight. It's so tight that one of the caves was called the Birth Canal. And this squeeze probably was like this big. It's probably no more than like, what, 18, 24 inches wide. It's a very tight squeeze. Like if you were slightly overweight, you were not getting through this crack. And it was very easy to get stuck. And this dude got stuck facing down. The worst position.
Blood began to pool in his brain, ensuring that he would die if he wasn't rescued soon. This is the story of John Jones and the Nutty Putty Cave disaster. John Edward Jones was born into a big family of 7 kids.
This poor
As a
kid
kid,
didn't
John and
deserve
his
it.
brother Josh were introduced to spelunking or cave exploring by their father. During their childhood, they would go on caving expeditions all over their home state of Utah, where they learned to love exploring the dark underground tunnels. At 26 years old, John was now married and had a 1-year-old daughter. His wife was also pregnant with another child, and they were now living in Virginia, where he was attending medical school to become a pediatric cardiologist. That year for Thanksgiving, John went back home to spend time with his family, and they all decided it would be fun to explore the famous Nutty Putty Cave to celebrate and connect over the holiday. On November 24th, 2009, at around 8 p.m., John and 10 other friends and family squeezed through the tight opening of Nutty Putty Cave. First explored in 1960 by caver Dale Green, Nutty Putty Cave is located 55 miles south of Salt Lake City, Utah. At its peak, Nutty Putty attracted 25,000 visitors a year and was famous for its narrow, slippery tunnels and particularly tight squeezes. Formed by hydrothermal vents shaping their way through the limestone, Nutty Putty Cave is named after the putty-like brown clay that lines its walls. Hydrothermal caves, like Nutty Putty, are characterized by a series of large domes connected by narrow, twisting tunnels. And the different sections of Nutty Putty have names appropriate for their size, such as the Birth Canal, the Aorta, the Maze, and the Scout Meter. In total, Nutty Putty was surveyed to be 1,355 feet long and 145 feet deep underground.
Not a very deep
Nutty
cave.
Putty Cave also has a bit of a tumultuous history. Due to its popularity, there had been excessive smoothing of the limestone rocks in the cave, and it was predicted that a fatality would occur in one of those sections. In fact, in 2004, 5 years before John Jones would enter the cave, 2 Boy Scouts nearly died in 2 separate incidents within a week of each other. In one of those cases, it took rescue crews 14 hours to rescue a 16-year-old scout from the cave using a complex system of pulleys. Following this incident, the cave was closed to visitors and wasn't reopened again until May of 2009. A gate was also installed at the entrance, and visitors would need to book ahead of time to ensure that there was only a single group entering the cave at once. Upon entering the cave, the group explored the largest room of the cave, known as the Big Slide. After that, John, his brother Josh, and 2 friends decided to
Check
try
this
to
out.
find a more
In
challenging
these
section they hadn't
harvesters,
heard
they
of,
actually
the Birth Canal.
have these circle
The
windows
Birth
in the
Canal
back.
is a narrow squeeze that drops down and opens up into a larger room and looks as though you're being birthed as you come out of it, hence the name. John found a hole in the wall that he thought led to the birth canal and went in head first. He crawled along his stomach for some time and didn't see anywhere that the tunnel opened up any further. In fact, it narrowed as he crawled along. Now, it's not entirely clear exactly where John was in the cave at this point. Some sources think that he had correctly entered the birth canal, but then accidentally turned down another section known as Scout Eater, whereas other sources claim that he was in a tunnel beside the birth canal named Ed's Push. In either case, these tunnels don't lead anywhere large enough for a person and are unexplored as a result. Eventually, he came upon a sharp downturn in the tunnel that went nearly straight down. Maybe thinking that this was the drop that he was looking for in the birth canal, John inched his way down the tunnel that measured only 10 inches by 18 inches across. Before long, John realized he had made a huge mistake and the tunnel didn't open up at all. It narrowed even further and he was now stuck upside down. The first person to find John was his brother Josh.
That's the worst
Josh
place,
got
because
to
blood
his brother
pools
and
to your
tried to
brain,
up
and that
down
is
the
not
tunnel. He was
good.
only able to move
Your
just
heart
a
has
little
to
bit
work
before John
against
slipped
the
out of
gravity
hands and
of
slid
blood.
right back into the crevice. When John slipped back in, he got wedged even further into the crevice.
That
and this
sucks,
time, one of his
dude.
hands was pinned underneath him, and the other was forced backward. The only thing sticking out of the crevice now were just John's feet and ankles. Realizing the severity of the situation, John and Josh said a quick prayer, and then Josh hurried out of the cave to get help. The first rescuer to arrive was a woman named Susie Matola, and by the time she got to John at 12:30 a.m., John had been trapped for 3 hours, 400 feet into the cave and 100 feet underground. Susie introduced herself to John's black running shoes that were the only thing visible in the tunnel, and John responded by saying, "Hi Susie, thanks for coming, but I really want to get out of here." Over the next few hours, dozens and dozens of rescuers arrived and worked to free John from the cave. They brainstormed different plans to free him and even discussed looping up the walls of the cave to slide him out. Eventually, they decided on a series of climbing cams. A rope would then be fed through the cams and attached to John's legs, and the rescuers would then pull on the other end of the rope and pull John up the crevice. As they attached the cams, they also began drilling away at the chunks of rock to widen up the tunnel. Unfortunately, due to how narrow the passages were, the drilling was slow, and it would take over an hour for just a couple of inches of rock to be removed. Another thing complicating the rescue was the position of John's body. The ceiling above where John was stuck was so low that they couldn't just pull him straight up. They would need to pull him up a little bit, and then readjust, and then pull some more, and then readjust some more. The first attempt using just the climbing cams was unsuccessful, and so rescuers decided instead to feed the rope through pulleys that were bolted to the walls of the cave. Again, this was a painfully slow process because of how narrow the cave was, and although a team of almost 100 rescuers worked frantically to get John out of Nutty Buddy Cave, only a single person was able to access John at a time. Meanwhile, 19 hours into the rescue, John's condition was beginning to worsen. The human body is adapted to pumping blood into the brain against the force of gravity when we're upright. When we're upside down, blood pools in the brain and the heart is unable to work hard enough to pump blood out of the brain. This also causes the heart to work much harder as it tries to continuously pump blood out of the brain against the force of gravity. Eventually, the strain on the heart and the cooling in the brain is fatal. As time went by, John started to have difficulty breathing and was alternating back and forth between being calm and being panicked. Around this time as well, a two-way radio was brought into the cave and lowered down to John, so John and his wife could talk to each other. Although they were both worried, they tried to comfort each other as best as they could.
Aww, what a cute
Finally,
couple.
rescuers finished drilling the holes and attaching the pulleys into the walls of the cave. 8 men
They actually looked really happy
and
together.
began inching John out of the crevice.
Like,
After so
this
much
guy
time spent upside
had-
down, John's
didn't
legs were in a
deserve
lot of
it.
pain, and so the team had to stop frequently to give him breaks. But eventually, they did actually manage to pull him up high enough for one of the rescuers to make eye contact with him. He looked tired, his eyes were red, and without rest, the rescuers pulled John up once again, and he was almost out when all of a sudden, the entire team fell backwards as the rope was loose in their hands. The closest rescuer was knocked unconscious when one of the pulleys broke free from the wall of the cave. When he came to, there was too much dust in the tunnel for him to see anything. When the dust settled, he saw that a large piece of rock that had a rope tied around it had broken, causing the pulley to break free. At the same time, he realized that John had slid right back into the crevice. This time, it seemed as though he was even deeper than before. The rescuer had also suffered severe facial injuries from the impact and had to have someone come in and take his place. When the new rescuer arrived, he noticed that John's breathing was much more shallow and less frequent as John was now struggling to stay alive. The new rescuer desperately tried to drill a new hole for the pulley, but after exhausting himself, was replaced once again. Another new rescuer arrived, and the next replacement tried to talk to John, but couldn't get any response. Shortly after that, a medical professional rolled into the cave to where John was, and John was pronounced dead at midnight on November 25th, 2009. The official cause of death was ruled to be cardiac arrest. During the rescue, a total of 137 rescuers worked continuously for 27 hours, but ultimately were unsuccessful in saving John Jones from the Nutty Buddy Cave.
That's
The following
sad,
day, authorities determined that retrieving the body would be too dangerous, and so cement was poured
almost
over
the
entrance,
anniversary,
and John's
too.
body has remained there ever since.
Some idiot shot the plaque. I think. Little Cave.
Donald Cerrone was diving.
Oh,
through
this
the
is
cave
not
that
good.
was
It's a
Mexico
frickin'
with something
water
that
cave.
was horrifyingly wrong. This is his story.
Diving is dangerous, caving is dangerous. When you add both of them together, it's really, really, really dangerous.
1983. Growing up, Donald was considered a bit of a troubled child. As a teenager, he took up street fighting, and this would result in him often ending up spending the night in jail. When Donald was 16, his parents had had enough of his behavior and the fighting, and sent him to live with his grandmother. His grandmother welcomed him with open arms and would even bail him out of jail after some of his street fights. The next morning, after she would bail him out, she would never bring up what happened the night before. She would simply say, "You know what you did," and then leave it at that. At the age of 20, Donald started kickboxing, and then Muay Thai after that, and as it turned out, he was pretty good. After winning a few kickboxing competitions, he decided to pursue a career in MMA, also known as...
It's actually pretty cool how he went from street fighting, which is not that good, to actually, competing.
To wear cowboy hats. He would win his first 9 fights in a row and was soon contending for championship fights in the WEC. After leaving the WEC, Donald signed with the insanely popular fight promotion company, the Ultimate Fighting Championship, also known as the UFC. As a fighter in the UFC, Donald rose to superstardom and became one of the largest drawing fighters in the promotion's history. In addition to fighting on the world stage and the largest fight promotion in the world, Donald is a bit of an adrenaline junkie, as are many of the individuals in that community. In his spare time outside of training and competing in the UFC, he competes and participates in all sorts of other high adrenaline pursuits like dirt biking, off-road racing, water skiing, and even bull riding. Another thing Donald really loves to do is scuba dive. After getting his certification in high school, he fell in love with all things diving. In his own words, he just loves diving. He loves shipwreck diving. He just loves everything about it. However, his favorite is cave diving. In August of 2018, Donald Cerrone was in Cozumel, Mexico. He planned to go diving with a friend of his who will call him
There's a
Alex.
lot more dust picked up on these tractors. It almost looks like a tornado is happening where the tractors are.
They also planned a slightly more serious dive for just the two of them at a cave known as Airwinter Cave.
Imagine that. Back then, they had to actually sit exposed to dust. Now now farmers can sit comfortably in their little cabs. I've been inside of a tractor before multiple times and combines. I even gotten to I think multiple times I was able to sit in a quad track. Basically, I was able to sit in this. I was able to sit in here, and oh my gosh, they are super duper high off the ground, and it feels so comfortable. And I didn't even get to operate it, and I just felt a sense of power, a sense of mechanical pride, a sense of absolute freedom. Hell, I forgot to actually tell my. Actually, is there oh my god, a Rostel smash on my disliked harvesters. Like, look at this. This is a baby harvester. I will say, oh yeah, this one, these ones are really good starter. It's called, if I didn't like Case more, I'd honestly get this. This is a very good starter tractor. I think I see a lot more of the Case combines. Like, I see the combine I'm driving right now, I see a lot more of this combine than any other one. The neighbor, the people that harvest the field across my driveway actually own the one I used to have. They own this one, that little baby, or one very close to it.
On August 17th, Donald kissed his wife and a new baby goodbye before he was leaving to go meet up with Alex. Before he left, his wife told him that she was really uncomfortable with him going caving with Alex. The reason she was uncomfortable was that she was worried about Alex's capabilities as a diver. For many years, Alex and Donald had been caving together, and Alex was even sort of a mentor to Donald. But Alex was now getting older, and his motor skills had declined with age. His mind was still as sharp as ever, but his body just couldn't keep up. Donald reassured his wife that everything was going to be fine, and that he was going to come home after the dive, just like always. His wife was still worried though, and so as an extra precaution and to reassure her, Donald ordered an extra cylinder of air. Originally, he had planned to take 2 cylinders for the dive, and so now he would have 3 total. For their dive, as is typical in cave diving, they would be diving in thirds.
That's cute thing he did. Take another cylinder. That's a very great thing to do.
In cave diving as well, the first divers who discover and map out a cave will run long ropes called guidelines throughout the cave to help divers find their way in and out of the caves. This is because many of these caves are massive and winding, low visibility corridors that are just difficult to tell apart, making it easy to get lost if you're not familiar with the system. These guidelines are also marked with directional symbols, known as cookies, that are clear and easy to read and will towards the exit of the cave. One of the leading causes of death in cave diving is when the guidelines are hidden. Lines are also marked with directional signals, known as cookies, that are clear.
Cookies, I like that terminology. How they're literally just called cookies.
In cave diving is when the guidelines are improperly used or improperly marked by the divers as they navigate the cave. These guidelines typically come in two different varieties. First are the fixed or main lines that are permanently installed in the cave system and eliminate the need for divers to install a large portion of the lines in a cave each time they dive. These can either start right at the exit or bit into the cave to ensure that recreational divers don't find them and then enter the caves without proper training or equipment. Main lines are also not all connected, requiring that divers bring reels with them to connect from one to the other using lines known as jump lines. Jump lines are attached by divers as they move through a cave to connect from one main line to the next. Jump lines are also removed by divers as they exit a cave to help simplify the lines within the system. Donald and Alex entered Airlito Cave from the little unassuming pond on the surface. They then traveled along the various lines of the cave to explore the gorgeous and expansive system they had come to see. At some point, they needed to transition from one line to another. Alex went first and grabbed his light and hung it around his neck so that he could make the switch with two hands. As Alex went to tie off, his buoyancy device, which is a little device that fills with air to increase or decrease your buoyancy, got loose and shot up to the ceiling of the cave. He then kicked his feet, spun around, and when he did that, the guideline, their lifeline, wrapped itself around him. Donald immediately swam over to Alex to help him try to untangle the line, but Alex started panicking. He then started thrashing violently.
That's not what you want to do. You're going to consume your oxygen very, very fast.
Silt from the bottom of the cave. Silt is the dust and sediment that
Yeah,
sits at the
like,
bottom
like
of
this,
the
like,
cave, and when
yeah.
it gets kicked up in the small spaces inside of a cave,
Visibility's
it
gone.
brings the visibility to almost zero. It's like swimming around in mist so thick that you could barely see the hand in front of your face. The Airlito Cave was now completely silted out. Knowing how dangerous this situation was, Donald took a few big steps backward away from Alex so he didn't get caught in the line either, and so he could regain visibility. Within arm's reach of the main line now, Donald watched helplessly as Alex thrashed around even more. One of the unspoken rules of cave diving, according to Donald, is that you only worry about yourself in a panic situation. The idea is, the panic person poses a threat to anyone trying to help, and there's no reason for two people to die if one person can still make it out. As he sat there, holding the main line, he looked towards the exit of the cave and knew that he was safe if he went that way. He knew where the exit was, he could easily swim to it, and be sure that he would get out alive. He also looked at the completely silted out section where Alex went and knew that Alex would almost certainly die without help. In the panic, Alex had somehow turned off his light, and Donald just sat there thinking that he hopes that he also didn't drop his mouthpiece, that he wasn't drowning to death just a few feet away from him. Donald decided to break one of his unspoken rules and decided to go into the silt to try to save Alex. As soon as he entered the silt, he lost all sense of direction. He didn't know which way was up or down, and then he started to panic as well. All of a sudden, he was taking deep, fast, panic breaths, completely freaking out, more panic than he's ever been in his entire life. In his panic, he smashed his head off of the ceiling of the cave and then closed his eyes. The hit to the head gave him a brief second of calm, and then he managed to tell himself to slow his breathing down. With his breathing slowed, barely able to see the hands in front of his face, he looked at his glowing watches that indicated his depth and time. He then checked the two pressure gauges on each of the cylinders he was using and knew that he had a third one that was completely full, still unopened. He then closed his eyes and sat there in the pitch black, silted out room, trying to think through the panic and figure out a plan. The first thing he did was try to feel around the silt and try to find Alex, but Alex was nowhere to be found. Thankfully, he had calmed himself down a little bit more, and then decided to start moving his hands along the wall of the cave to see if he could figure out where he was. Typically, with visibility, divers will make a mental note of the different landmarks in the cave so they can find their way out. But the channel that they were in was one that they were on their way to explore. They weren't coming out of it, so it was entirely unfamiliar to them. He then decided to check his compass, because when they came into the cave, he had measured the direction of the exit from the first jump to be 126 degrees. This was a bit of a long shot, because in the winding tunnels of the cave, you can be facing the correct direction towards the exit, but if you're not in the right sector of the cave, that direction might just lead to a wall or a tunnel. Without any other choice, he tried to swim that direction, but immediately hit the wall. He then tried to went right into another wall, and now he was right back into the panic. So now he's kicking and thrashing and freaking out and swimming violently, and then all of a sudden, he exited the silt and stumbled on the main line. Donald grabbed it and tried to calm himself down once again. But there was a new problem. He was on the wrong side of the silted section of the main line. Behind him, deeper into the cave, was silt-free and clear. The way out of the cave, the way that he needed to go, was completely silted out still, and the exit was almost 1,000 yards away. In addition, there was a jump in between where he was and where he needed to be, meaning that he would have to find his way untethered through the silt to make it out of the cave. He sat there for a moment, thinking about the maps of the cave that he had scoured before they entered that day. He knew that up ahead there was a split in the cave. One side went to the exit, and the other went deeper in the cave. So, he re-entered the silt and started to feel around and managed to find a hole. Not sure if this was correct or not, he kept on going and came up on another one. He felt around and thought that it felt familiar and decided to swim into it. But then he noticed that he was swimming against the current. When they had come into the cave, he also noticed that they were swimming against a small current, meaning that given that he was now traveling in the opposite direction, he was swimming. Once again, he frantically swam back to the main line on the opposite side of the silt. Sitting there, literally hyperventilating from panic, all he could think of that morning was when he kissed his wife and baby and assured them that he was coming home. So he swam back into the dark abyss of silt once again, and panicked once again. And now, in the pitch-black darkness of the cave, he thought to himself, all of this heavy breathing is sucking all of the air out of my tanks. So in addition to being lost in the darkness, he started to worry about running out of air entirely. Trying to calm himself, he looked at his watch and his gauges, and then back at his watch, and managed to figure out that he had roughly an hour left of air. He started to think about what would happen once he ran out of air. On the air-only system he was using, once he ran out, the mouthpiece would just fill with water, and then he would inhale the water, and he would drown. Ironically enough, one of Donald's biggest fears is drowning. So, not wanting to drown, he grabbed his buoyancy device and began breathing into it to fill it up completely. With it full, he shot up to the ceiling of the cave and was now resting upside down. At first, he sat there thinking about his wife and daughter and thought about grabbing his grease pen and notepad to write a letter to them about how he had messed up and how sorry he was. Then he thought about how terrified he was of drowning and decided, once he ran out of air, to reach for his buoyancy device until there was no more oxygen left in it. Once it was only expelled carbon dioxide, he would keep breathing until he slowly passed out, at which point he would be awake when he drowned. As he sat there thinking about writing a goodbye note and how he intended on just going to sleep in the darkness, he was infuriated with himself that he was giving up hope and succumbing to the situation. He thought to himself, I'm a fighter, that's not what fighters do, and so he began crawling along the ceiling of the cave upside down. This time, he remembered that there was a large crack that ran the length of the cave on the ceiling. In his panic, he frantically crawled along the ceiling.
So much, he's like, no, I'm not going to stop fighting, I'm going to push.
He found it. So he latched onto the crack, crawled along it, and then it started to widen. And then there was light off in the distance. He could see the green glow of light filtering into the cave. So Donald swam frantically to the glow, all the while still panicking, still hyperventilating, and when he reached the opening, his tanks got stuck and they wouldn't go through. And so he was kicking and thrashing and freaking out, but he managed to follow the cracks some more, and then his tanks went through. And then there was the opening of the cave. He made it. Upon making it out, relief was just unbelievable. One second he was writing a goodbye note to his wife and kid, and the next he was going home to see them. As he left the water, he saw that Alex was just sitting there. As it turned out, Alex managed to somehow grab the main line in his panic and just followed it out of the cave. The two of them looked at each other, and Alex said to Donald, so we're not diving together anymore, are we? And Donald would answer back, no, that was it. Donald then grabbed his phone, texted his wife, and said, I had a bit of a scary moment today, but I'm coming home. If you made it this far, I just want to thank you for watching. I made this video and have wanted to make this video for a long time due to popular requests.
Oh my god, PlayStation 4 10 years ago? Yeah, let's live it. That's the process. Look how cool the PS4 looks in this video. The graphics are good, but they could be way better.
Trying to create things that people have never experienced. Magical moments that they need to remember from the rest of their lives.
I will say, man, I enjoyed my PS4. It was a good console. But all legends have to die at some point, man. PS4 is not dead, it just doesn't look as good as it does anymore. This is like really good looking back then.
I would like to make a small addition to the team.
PS4. Man, now look at this stretch. This is gonna be like one of the biggest stretches. Oh wait, I've just separated the field into two pieces. I'm gonna tear down this part over here. Hey, tear down. Anyway, as I was saying, I'm gonna rip down this section of soybeans right over here. I'm gonna move over there. I'm gonna finish it off.
No one does small travel like Amtrak. Big cities to small towns. Amtrak.
In this video, we're going to go over 3 stories about cave exploring that went horrifying wrong. Today's final story is about a terrifying freak occurrence that has never happened before or since in the history of caving. I have to warn you, it is intense to say the least, so viewer discretion is advised.
You know what? I have a good challenge for me.
In
It's a dangerous challenge, and I will need to come equipped with it it'd be a kind of a cool thing to poke at. Explore an abandoned uranium mine. I have heard that they do get pretty radioactive. I hope it's alpha radiation. If it's alpha radiation, even 90% of it's alpha, that's easy to block. All you gotta do, I'd probably wear like a hazmat suit and a simple gas mask. That should do the trick against alpha. Beta is a little bit more tough. You might need a little bit more of a heavier hazmat suit. Gamma is almost basically undefendable against. It'll penetrate through many inches of lead. I wonder if there's anything that stops them.
In Alabama, 30 minutes east of Huntsville, there is a hiking trail that goes through the woods. This is a fairly ordinary looking trail. It's a little bit rocky, it passes over several small creeks, but as you continue down this trail, hills start to rise up on either side. As you continue deeper into the forest, these keep growing until it's almost like you're walking into the mouth of a canyon. Near the end of this trail, a cliff rises up in the distance, and the trail seems to end at the foot of these cliffs. If you keep walking toward this, right before the cliffs, the ground slopes down very gently. Right at this spot, you have to be extremely careful because abruptly, the slope drops into a massive 143-foot pit straight into the ground.
Jeez.
This is the Stevens Gap Pit. It's one of 2 entrances to Stevens Gap Cave and by far the most dangerous way to enter. On one side of the pit, there's a flat edge that's decent to stand on, but the edge from the trail slopes down right into the massive opening. It's so easy to slip and fall right into it if you're not paying attention. And obviously, with the depth, it is certain death if you fall in. Thankfully, this isn't the only entrance to Stevens Gap. A few dozen feet over from the pit, there is a large opening with a much gentler slope that takes you almost to the bottom. But in order to reach the true bottom, which is the pit itself, you have to wind your way down a series of dim, rocky tunnels. As with most caves, this requires a helmet with a headlamp because of how dark it gets, even with these large openings. And thankfully as well, over the years, the cave was bought and requires a permit because it's now private property. This helps to conserve the cave and to prevent anyone from just wandering in and accidentally falling. This is also particularly dangerous at nighttime. The opening is not easily distinguishable from the pathway. In August of 1997, a woman named Karen was visiting Stevens Gap to do some exploring, and like many other more experienced campers, she intended on rappelling into the pit all the way to the bottom instead of taking the easier entrance. So, she and the group she was with got to the entrance and then set up their rappel anchor near the edge. This is usually either by bolting into some rocks or by fixing a rope to some trees. Then she got on her harness and helmet, and at the front of her harness was her rappel device. This is a special device that allows you to feed rope fuel and control your descent speed. For her descent of 143 feet, the rope would need to be several dozen feet longer from the anchor point, plus some additional on the end for slack. Once everything was ready and Karen was set to go, she grabbed a hold of the rope, got to the edge of the pit, and slowly backed over the edge as she let go through the rappel device. She took a few steps down until eventually she was suspended over nothing but air. Then she was at 10 feet.
That is a scary feeling,
30
dude.
feet, and
I went to Wisconsin Dells at Tomfooleries near Kalahari, and at the top you have to jump down, okay? And oh god, it feels so weird. But like for the first 2 seconds, but after you get used to it, it's okay. Like when you jump, it feels like you're gonna fall and get injured, and it's like like you get set into distress. But then like after you you get slashed into your harness, you slowly drift down. Like it's both one of the scariest things I have experienced and one of the most coolest things I've experienced. I hate that moment of shock. It's like when you stand at the bottom, it's like 23 foot up or 25 foot up, maybe around there. I have no idea why I say 23. I only focus and try to run it up to 5. So anyway, when you look up, it's like it's not that tall. But when you go and actually ascend it, it's like, oh, never mind.
The rope went right through the rappel device, and Karen plummeted 100 feet to the bottom of the pit and to her death. Karen had fed the wrong rope through the rappel device. The one she grabbed was the safety line that was only 40 feet long and had no knot at the end to prevent it from going right through the rappel device. Without realizing this, the rope slipped right through her fingers and sent her to the bottom of Stevens Gap Pit. Her body was later recovered from the bottom, and tragically, she's not the only person to have died at the bottom of this cave. In fact, several incidents almost exactly like this have occurred over the past few decades. There have been a few rope breaks, equipment failures, and accidental slips, and 4 people died here between 2015 and 2019 alone. All of this at the end of this seemingly ordinary trail through the woods. In May of 1990, 5 divers all gathered at a campground near Gainesville, Florida to do some diving. That day, they were actually doing something known as ponding, which is where you go from spring to spring and diving and checking out the underwater scenery. This area of Florida is perfect for that because of the sheer number of clear surface springs that are teeming with sea life. The spring they're going to explore in this campground is known as Otter Springs, which looks like any other ordinary pond. It's not very big, there are some trees going around the bank, and there's a grassy beach on the other side. What's cool about these springs, though, is that because the water is so clear and warm, there are often tons of fish and other sea life in them. And even though Otter Springs isn't a very large spring, it does go down to around 40 feet, and the water is very clear the whole depth. After the group had gotten suited up and started exploring the water, they all descended to the bottom of the spring to check out a large crack running along the floor. In this area as well, many of these springs are either fed by or open up into a large underwater cave system. Otter Springs is one of these, and at the bottom of the 40-foot depth, there is an entrance inside of a large horizontal crack that runs along the pond floor. All 5 of them got down into this crack and saw that it opened up even further into a rocky semicircle which tunneled off into the distance. Unfortunately, no one in this group was cave certified, so this was as far as they could safely go. In fact, this group was composed of a woman named Jackie, who was a former instructor of several of the others, brothers Ron and Alan, and then 2 friends, Chris and Ken. And other than Jackie, who had over 100 dives, and Ron, who had done 52 dives, the others had done less than 7 dives each, so definitely not enough experience to even think about going inside. But as they sat at the entrance, Jackie could see that Ken wanted to go inside. She got his attention and shook her head not to, and knowing that she was the most experienced, he gave her an okay back. Then she pointed to her gate because they were far enough into their dive that it was time to head back up. And then she started swimming up to the surface. But not fully appreciating the danger, Ken still really wanted to go in the cave.
No,
which the others
dude.
could tell as well and tried talking him out of it. Before long, Ken was making his way into the tunnel. They quickly went in after him to make sure he didn't get lost, but soon enough, they were all kind of enjoying it. As they swam around checking out the different passages and showing each other the cool stuff they were seeing, they figured that when they were done, they'd simply retrace their steps and head back out, and it would be no big deal. When Jackie got to the surface and looked back down, she saw that no one had followed her, and her heart sank. Right away, she was pretty upset that they'd gone in, especially because it wasn't as simple as just going in after them. She sort of had to wait helplessly until they came back up on her own. At this point, there were still lots of bubbles coming out from the entrance, though, so she hoped they would just be in and out quickly and then come back up. Then she got out of the water to the bank of the spring and watched the water anxiously. Inside the cave, the four others made their way deeper and deeper, having a blast checking out the tunnels. Then Ron stopped for a second to look at his gauge, and as soon as he lifted his head again, all of the silt they had been kicking up everywhere caught up to him and completely blinded him. He couldn't see the walls, the ceiling, up, down, and then without realizing it, he was hyperventilating, swimming around in a panic. He swam around frantically, bumping into the walls and the ceiling, and then more walls, all while breathing way more air than he should have been. And then, miraculously, there was light. Somehow, in his panic, he had just happened to stumble back of the exit and immediately swam back up to the surface. As soon as he surfaced, he looked around and saw Jackie standing on the bank and asked where the others were. In his mind, he'd been searching desperately for a long time and thought he was the last person to surface. In reality, he was the first person to surface. Everyone else was still somewhere inside. Jackie contemplated going back in, but with only a little bit of air left, she realized it would be a mistake. And while they were having this conversation, it clearly sounded panicked, and a man nearby walked over and asked them if everything was okay. He'd seen everyone go down, and then asked them if they were cave certified. Then he asked if they'd gone to the cave, and as soon as they said yes, he took off running. By chance, there was a barbecue going on that day attended by diving legend Woody Jasper. Not only did he have over 500 dives, but he had all of his equipment with him in the back of his truck. Before long, he was running over and suiting up to get in the water, and not only was he angry that they'd been so irresponsible, he knew that the chances of getting them out alive were very slim. They'd been in for almost an hour at that point, which was a long time.
And that guy such a this guy, good record under his belt.
If they were panicked. Finally, Woody dropped into the water and made his way to the cave entrance and saw that it was clear of any silt. This meant that no one had been in this area for a while, and the three left inside were not close to the entrance. As he got into the tunnels, he was almost certain that this would be a body recovery. Then he made his way deeper in and came up to an obvious fork, with one tunnel leading left and the other tunnel leading right. One of these was still cloudy, so he went into that tunnel, and almost immediately, this proved to be right. When not far into the tunnel, he found a mask on the floor. In a panicked state, divers will often lose their masks or take them off shortly before drowning. The mask then sinks to the bottom, while their body stays in place. Then Woody looked directly up from the mask and saw four legs huddled together in a crevice, but he couldn't see their heads because they were in a small air pocket that had been created by their own expelled gas. He released some of his own gas to bubble up and signal them, but they didn't respond. Then he tried pulling on their legs and realized they were unconscious in the gas pocket. This gas pocket was created by their expelled air and didn't have enough oxygen to keep them alive. At some point, they had passed out and were now slowly suffocating. Upon realizing this, he grabbed one of them and immediately headed for the surface. As soon as he was out of the water, Jackie saw that it was Alan, who was blue, and he wasn't breathing or responding. They got him back to the bank and started CPR right away, while Woody went right back down into the cave. He quickly got to the fork and went back to the crevice, but this time, incredibly, the other diver was moving. The gas Woody used to try to signal them was just enough for him to regain consciousness. Woody then swam up to him and grabbed his hand to reassure him that help was there. On the surface, CPR continued, and soon enough, they noticed that Alan's eyes started to move around. It seemed as though Alan might pull through. Then all of a sudden, the person performing compressions actually felt a heartbeat under his hand as Alan started to regain consciousness. He still had tons of water in his lungs, and there was no telling how much brain damage he might have due to the lack of oxygen, but at least for now, he was alive. Back in the tunnels, Woody buddy breathed with the other diver all the way to the surface, where Jackie saw it was Chris. By the time they got there, he was able to get out of the water on his own. Woody immediately went right back down, this time to find Ken, who had been in the water the longest. He made his way back to the fork, then past the air pocket, and eventually to Ken's body. Unlike the other two, he had drowned. He was brought back up to the surface, and CPR was performed, but he would never regain consciousness. He was simply without oxygen for too long, and Jackie would even say he looked different when he was brought up. She knew right away there was no saving him. If you've seen my video covering the Boston Cavern disaster, you might remember that it took place in Yorkshire Dales National Park, England. This area is unique in that it possesses the perfect combination of conditions for the landscape we went in caves. The surface here is covered in limestone, and it rains in England as much as it's stereotypically do, making this area a cave dream. In this one national park, there are over 2,500 known caves, and probably many more that have yet to be discovered. Many of these connect together through impossible tech passages, and others are their own distinct, expansive systems. Many of these are just simple potholes. Many of these are massive underground labyrinths that possess chambers large enough to fit entire buildings into. About an hour from the edge of this national park is Tadcaster Grammar School, which is the high school that takes students on all sorts of exciting field trips. This might be out to the coast to see the ocean, or to the countryside, and nearly to the caves of Yorkshire Dales. And the students love caving. Contrary to what many people imagine caving as, it's not all tight squeezes and claustrophobia inducing crawling. Caves come in different shapes and depth. Beginner and intermediate caves allow newer cavers to explore the alien underground world without much of the associated danger. These are exactly the types of conditions that the students set out to experience in November of 2005. From the school in Tadcaster, they traveled an hour northwest toward the Bar Bottom City.
Have a few
From
months
there,
old.
they traveled another 45 minutes or so
This
through the rolling green hills of the English countryside. Along these two-lane roads marked with little stone walls on either side, the students made their way deeper into Yorkshire Dales National Park before coming on a depression in the hills. From a distance, this looks like nothing more than a small divot in the green hillside, completely unremarkable. It's covered in some bushes, there's a tree stump on one side, but as you get closer, you can see that this depression keeps going into the hillside and eventually turns into a small opening. This opening is actually the entrance to a cave known as Manchester Hole. This entrance, as with many in the area, gives no indication of the huge expansive tunnels under the Earth's surface. In fact, Manchester Hole alone descends for over 1,000 feet underground, and it's even part of a larger system known as Golden Pond. This larger system is miles and miles of tunnels that you would never expect to be underneath the grassy hills above. But despite its size, Manchester Hole is not a very technically challenging cave. There aren't any super tight squeezes or large vertical shafts, and there isn't much special equipment required other than some waterproof clothing. This makes it a popular destination for amateur cavers and novices because you can still get all the cave experience without any of the additional danger. And so it was perfect for this class of 14-year-olds on their first caving adventure. From a rocky creek bed, the group of 10 students and 3 teachers pulled on their yellow rubber suits and helmets fixed with headlamps and then made their way into the depression in the hillside. From the entrance, the bushes and other vegetation quickly disappears down a series of descending boulders as the light no longer filters in. The group then made their way into a horizontal corridor filled with large jagged boulders and about an 8-foot-high ceiling, and already it was very dark. Just the smallest amount of light from their headlamps lit up the hallway. Then they made their way into the first large chamber, which is almost like a theater because of how big it is. This room has some small puddles and a stream running its length, but interestingly, it didn't have any stalactites along the ceiling. Instead, it looked as though there was mud caked on the ceiling, giving the rocks a dirty brown finish instead of the usual gray. The students took a look around the chamber and then moved to the next series of passages, which is more or less a scramble over a bunch of boulders. And just like the students the year before, they were having a blast exploring the underground world. Then they went through one more large room before coming up on the only real challenge in Manchester Hole. This challenging section is known as the Crawl. It's about 40 feet long, and the ceiling here is much lower than the rest of the cave at around 3 feet high. Then right in the middle of this length, there is a U-shaped depression in both the floor and the ceiling. So as you're crawling along, you have to go down into this depression and then back up on the other side. But in comparison to the tight squeezes of some other caves, this crawl isn't much of a challenge. 3 feet is more than enough room to crawl comfortably, so one by one, all of the students made their way across the 40-foot crawl that had about 6 inches of water running along the bottom. Now, over 1,000 feet into the cave, and a couple of hours into the trip, the students split into smaller groups and started checking out some of the fossil formations that cover the walls at this depth. It was around this point in their trip that they might have noticed something terrifying happening inside the cave.
Have you
What
lost
is
a
this
Medicare
thing?
chip? At healthcare.gov, 4 out of 5 customers can find a quality plan for $10 or less.
Oh,
per
you
month
can put
with
weights
financial
on
help.
it. That's pretty
Enroll in a
interesting.
plan today at healthcare.gov. Paid for by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
Upriver of the Manchester Hole is a water reservoir that supplies water to the nearby area. On one side of this reservoir is a dam to keep all of the water in, and this stone dam has a walkway that runs across the top. Supporting this walkway are these big stone arches that look similar to the arches of an aqueduct. The water level in this reservoir fluctuates based on the demand nearby and how much it rains, and so inside the reservoir, this means that the water level will either be far from the arches or right up to the arches. Traditionally, the water level inside Manchester Hole can be reliably predicted by how close the water is to the arches. When the water is close to the arches, this means that it's been raining a lot, and so naturally there will be a lot of water inside the cave. When the water is far from the arches, the cave is much drier. That day, the water was high, but there wasn't any rain in the forecast, so this shouldn't have been an issue. Except, that day, while they were exploring, the winds on the surface became violently strong and caused massive waves to form in the reservoir. These then crashed through the arches and caused the river to rise several feet in under an hour. Because these caves often have multiple entrances and drainage systems, this then poured directly into Manchester Hole. And the reason that the Manchester Hole has mud along the ceiling is that, as with the Mossdale Caverns, it tends to flood completely. As the students went around exploring, all of a sudden, within just a few minutes, the water went from ankle deep to chest deep. And with how quickly this happened, everyone went into a complete panic and started sprinting toward the exit. Each of the smaller groups made their way through the corridors, fighting the freezing cold water rushing in and the currents that it created. And eventually, they all got to the crawl, which created a bottleneck and slowed down their progress. With how high the water had gotten, it completely submerged the U-shaped depression midway through. This meant that the students had to literally swim through the freezing rushing water to get through to the other side. And to find their way through the water, all they had were their now dimming headlamps. As they lined up to go through one by one, in last was one of the instructors and one of the students named Joseph. Joseph was a really strong swimmer. Knowing this, he let a bunch of students go through before him to make sure they could get through the strong currents. Finally, once all the other students had gone through, the two of them went in together and started swimming. Before they could get to the other side, they bumped into some of the other students who hadn't cleared the way in and forced them to turn back around. As they came back out on the other side, this time, Jo went ahead of the instructor, and the last time she saw him, he was heading through the tunnel ahead of her. This time, she came up out of the water, and the way was clear, so they all kept running toward the exit. Thankfully, they made it safely to the surface, where they were surprised to see that no rain had fallen, but the creek that was there when they first entered was now a rushing river. Then they did a head count and got 12. Then they counted again, and it was 12 again. And then they realized that Jo wasn't with them. Jo hadn't made it to the other side of the crawl, but in the chaos, no one had realized until they made it out of the cave. And in the area they were in, there wasn't even any cell reception to contact emergency services. As soon as they were in range, they made the call. By late afternoon, 40 rescuers descended over the cave. With the water already much lower, it took them less than an hour to make their way to the crawl, and tragically, Jo was found lying lifelessly on the other side. He was in a state of severe hypothermia and was removed from the cave and taken to the hospital as fast as possible, but unfortunately, he never regained consciousness. This was just devastating for his friends and family, because not only had he died a hero trying to help other students, he was just beloved by everyone. At Tadcaster, he was a star student and athlete and was considered by everyone to have an incredibly bright future ahead of him.
Aww.
To make matters worse, it's not entirely clear what happened that caused his death. The leading theory is that the combination of the dimming headlamps, the freezing water, and a possible surge of water resulted in him going down the wrong passage. Then, he wasn't able to make it back before running out of air and passing out. Then, sometime later, the water flushed his body back to the other side of the crawl. With this tragic loss, obviously, many people were angry and felt that there was some negligence on the part of the instructors. With the reservoir being such a short distance away, it was seen as irresponsible not to check the water levels. But over the course of the court proceedings, it was found that other than the freak wind, the instructors had followed all of the other safety protocols and procedures, and ultimately proved that no one was responsible for Joe's death.
Creepiest people, cases of people.
It was found that other than the freak wind, the instructors had followed all of the other safety protocols and procedures, and ultimately proved that no one was responsible for Joe's death. In the history of caving in Manchester Hole, the water levels have never risen as quickly before or since. It was just a tragic and freak occurrence. Hello everyone, thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.
Creepiest people, cases of people disappearing.
Oh, that's awesome. What are you working on today?
You know what? We need to get into some spooky content. It's October. It's October
Hello
12th.
everyone, and welcome to Scare Interesting.
Let's start
This
digging in
week,
the creepy.
we have two incredibly creepy cases of people disappearing, and some found footage related to each of the cases that makes things even more disturbing.
I actually like how this guy's like, oh my god, top 10 reasons why, top 10 pictures of Burger King foot lettuce at 3 a.m. not clickbait. No, he's not like one of those stupid overhyped YouTubers. He's actually pretty
As
cool.
always, viewer discretion is strongly advised.
Strongly advised. You know, whatever, it's October. In my defense, it's October. Hey, why are you showing scary stuff on you? October.
In 2006, life was going really well for Jennifer Kess. 3 years earlier, she graduated with honors from the University of Central Florida, where she'd been studying for a degree in finance. personality was a perfect fit for the job. Jennifer always wanted to learn more, and she had a dynamic energy that could light up any room. At the same time, her parents also instilled a sense of caution in her. They'd been mugged at gunpoint in New Jersey years earlier, and they wanted their daughter to always be safe. By feeding this combination of energy and caution into her work, she got promoted twice in 2 years, quickly earning enough money to buy a condo at the Mosaic Millennium condominium complex in Orlando. And for the most part, this was a great place to live. It was fancy and gated, and was right in the heart of the city, and only a mile down the road from a brand new mall. When she moved in, a lot of the condos were still undergoing a conversion from apartments, and because of this, she had to put up with a lot of construction work with the construction workers that came with it. The daily comments and catcalls obviously were incredibly annoying. Whenever one of the workers had to go into her apartment to do anything, she was on the phone with her parents until they left, just to be safe. But she thought it was worth it to own such a prime piece of real estate so young, and the workers would be gone before too long anyway. If it ever got too much, she could always rely on her boyfriend Rob to talk to the workers and get them to tone things down. Jennifer and Rob met while Rob was visiting Orlando for a trade show that her firm was exhibiting, and from then on, Rob and Jennifer were said to be very much in love, even though they chose not to move in together. They both had careers they wanted to focus on, and because their jobs were about 3 hours apart, they had to make do with a long-distance relationship in the meantime.
Yeah.
Instead, they met up for lost time every weekend, and called each other and texted each other daily. In 2005, they decided to
I
go
can
on a
never
5-day
find a
vacation
spot
together
to
the following January and flew to
fill this
St.
thing
Croix
up.
in the British Virgin Islands. Their return flight landed late in the evening, so Jennifer decided to spend the night at Rob's and then drive straight to work the following morning. She had a normal day at work, despite being tired, and then at about 6 p.m., she left her office and went home and called her dad and brother to tell them how amazing her trip had been. Then, after getting home, she called her mother, her closest friend, and she told them every detail on how the trip was like something out of a fairy tale. Meanwhile, Rob felt exactly the same way. On the day they returned, his best friend even joked with him that he was in love with Jennifer, even if he wouldn't admit it. Sadly for Rob, the last time he spoke to Jennifer didn't go so well. At 10 p.m., she called and they got into an argument. Rob said that the long-distance relationship was making things more complicated than they wanted, which was one of the reasons he found it hard to admit to himself how much he cared about her. The following morning, Rob didn't get the call he usually got from Jennifer before she left work. He tried calling her, but it went straight to voicemail. And at first, he was worried that she was still upset with him for the disagreement the night before, but he thought she'd just cool down at work and they could talk. So he went to his morning meeting, and after he came out, he tried to call her again, and again, it went to voicemail. After the next meeting, he tried again, and the same thing happened. This wasn't normal behavior for Jennifer, and their argument hadn't been that bad, so Rob started to get worried. At the same time, Jennifer's boss called one of Jennifer and her parents' mutual friends. Jennifer hadn't turned up to work and hadn't called, which was extremely unusual. She was the type of person who was happy to get up at 6 a.m. and drive 3 hours to make it to the office on time. She would even call the office if she was only just 5 minutes late. So next, figuring she might be at her parents', the family friend then called to find out if she was
Where do you
there,
fill this
and
thing
she was
up at?
Her dad took the call in his office and Jennifer wasn't there, so he called her cell phone. His call then also went to voicemail, and it never went to voicemail. The family had one rule: if one of the parents called, you answered. When they were a little younger, not answering the phone meant losing their phone and car privileges, and even though Jennifer was older now, it was a habit that had stuck. Right away, her parents seemed to sense that something terrible had happened, so the whole family jumped in their car and set off to Orlando. As they drove, her dad called the police, and then they called the condo office to see if they could check and see if her car was still there. Someone went down to check, but he couldn't see it, so even more worried, her parents asked him to check out her condo. A few moments later, after the worker had found another person to make sure it was legal to enter, the man from the condo called back. No one was in her apartment, and everything looked fine. When the family arrived, they looked inside Jennifer's place, and it was just as the guy from the office described it. The t-shirt she'd worn to bed was on the floor, makeup was all over her countertop, and the shower and a towel were still wet. It seemed apparent that she'd at least gotten ready for work and hadn't been gone for long. While they were there, they were met by a police officer, and her parents explained what was happening and tried to make them understand that this wasn't normal behavior. Unfortunately, the officer either didn't get it or didn't care. He told them she probably just wanted somewhere to cool off after arguing with her boyfriend, and then left the scene. So with the police doing nothing, Jennifer's parents got as many friends and family together as possible and started looking for her themselves. They put up posters and handed out flyers with her picture and went everywhere that Jennifer might have gone, which included the mall, her favorite bars, and her usual route to work. That night, when she still hadn't shown up, the police finally declared her missing. 2 days later, a tenant living close by recognized her car from a news report and let the police know that one just like it had been sitting abandoned outside her apartment for days. Later, another person claimed to have spotted Jennifer's car swerving near her condo with 2 people struggling to control the steering wheel inside. However, this crucial piece of information didn't come forward until much later. When they initially found the car, it was parked a mile from the place in another condo complex called Huntington and the Green. instead a rougher area known for its high crime rate. They would go on to find one of Jennifer's fingerprints in a large of the gas pedal. They also found a DNA fragment in the car that didn't belong to anyone Jennifer knew, but unfortunately it didn't match anyone already in the police database either. Maybe the worst though was that all her valuables were still in the car, suggesting it hadn't been a regular robbery. It also looked as someone had wiped the car down to remove any evidence they would have left. Weirdly, police also said there didn't seem to be any sign of a struggle. After her car was thoroughly searched and no leads were found, police realized that there were plenty of surveillance cameras pointed in the direction near where the car was parked. The police then checked the cameras and found a single piece of footage of some time after she disappeared. In the video, a man dressed in workman's clothes parked Jennifer's car, sat motionless for 30 seconds, and then exited the vehicle and walked away. Unfortunately, there was no video of Jennifer in and around the car, just that single clip of the car, and then the car was abandoned afterward. And unfortunately, no matter what camera angle they looked at, the fence blocked the man's face, making it impossible to identify who it was. They tried everything they could to enhance the image, calling in favors from the FBI and NASA, who also did the best they could. But in the end, all they could really determine that it was a man between 5'3" and 5'5", with large feet for his height. This wasn't really helpful either, because so many workers who fit that description lived in that building and the condos close to it. Quite a few of them were also people who worked in the conversion that Jennifer's own condo had been given somewhere to stay while the work continued. So next, the police used a scent dog to see if they could find any trace of this person. The dog would go on to lead them from her car back to her condo complex, so they wondered if whoever it was in the video had returned to her condo parking lot after abandoning the car. It's possible he wasn't from there at all and had only left the car to throw the police off his scent. While the investigation continued, Jennifer's parents moved into her apartment. They wanted to be as close to the investigation as possible and living at the possible crime scene was as close as they got. But unfortunately, despite the video footage, police began by interviewing anyone close to Jennifer rather than following what seemed to be such an obvious lead, which was the man in the video. First, they interviewed her ex-boyfriend Matt. Jennifer didn't know this, but while she'd been in the Virgin Islands with Rob, her brother had invited Matt and another friend to stay with him at the condo. This actually wasn't all that unusual, since her brother and Matt were still good friends, but the police were told that Matt had been upset since they split up and was jealous of the relationship with Rob and wanted to get back together with her. Despite this, after the interviews, there was nothing to suggest that Matt had anything to do with her disappearance. They also quickly ruled out her family and Rob too. Then they questioned her co-workers, but again, this was just another dead end. In May of 2007, so several months after she disappeared, Jennifer's company put up a $1 million reward for any information that could help find her by July 4th. To claim the money, though, she had to be alive. The hope was that if she'd been abducted for human trafficking, people involved might prefer $1 million and the hassle of keeping her hidden. Unfortunately, July 4th came and went, and the money was never claimed. By then, Jennifer's family had had just about enough of the police, who they thought messed up the investigation from the start. They would go on to spend close to $100,000 on their own investigations and came up with some new and startling information. Not only were they the ones to find the witness who claimed to have seen the car swerving, but they also found evidence that seemed to suggest that someone was thrown into the trunk of the car. Apparently, there were scratch marks in and around the trunk of the car that led them to make this conclusion. If they had noticed from the beginning, there might have been more urgency during the initial stages of her disappearance. So, finally in frustration, Jennifer's parents went on to lobby with another missing woman's family for a bill to force law enforcement to inform how they react to missing persons. This was passed unanimously in 2008, but unfortunately, in the meantime, the case was passed from Orlando Police to the FBI in 2010, and then to Florida's Cold Case Unit in 2022. Today, Jennifer is still considered to be missing and in danger.
Oh my god.
From the Jameson family, life in Eufaula, Oklahoma was anything but quiet. Bobby and recently divorced Sherry Lynn met in 2002, and their summer romance blossomed into marriage just 2 years later. The year before they were married, Bobby was in a bad car accident that caused chronic back pain that would continue to plague him for the rest of his life. From that point onward, he found it hard to work, and by the time he was 44, the agony and lack of a job were getting so bad that it was triggering bouts of depression. Despite their recent love and marriage, Sherry Lynn couldn't really care for him either, because frankly, she had her own demons. When she was younger, her sister died after being stung by a bee, and from that point on, she struggled with her own deep depression. She'd also been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, so known to avoid taking the medication she was prescribed for both. By 2009, so 5 years into their marriage, she was finding it difficult to look after their 6-year-old daughter Madison, her son from her first marriage Colton, and Mason, the family dog. And thus far, their marriage was not a happy one. Bobby and Sherry Lynn both found life hard, and sometimes that caused heated arguments. In any event, outside their disabilities won't make things worse. Things really started to convinced that their house was haunted. Their pastor even claimed After his pastor talked to him about it, Bobby claimed he was joking, but his pastor got the impression that Bobby wasn't joking at all. He tried to play it off, but it was fairly obvious he wasn't when he asked if there was some sort of bullet that he could use to shoot demons. Apparently, Bobby was convinced that 2 or sometimes 4 evil spirits were living on his roof, and Sherry Lynn believed it too. She said that both her and Madison had even seen the spirits inside the house. You see, at the time, Madison had an imaginary friend named Emily. It's obviously not unusual for 6-year-olds to have imaginary friends, and especially not a family that keeps to themselves and whose kids don't have any close friends because of that. Sherry Lynn was convinced that Emily was an evil spirit. According to their friends and family, Sherry Lynn thought Emily was a witch, and she held seances to try to get the demons away from her daughter. The neighbors, for the most part, didn't take it as seriously as Sherry Lynn, but they did seem to agree that the house was haunted. Sherry Lynn's best friend Nikki claims that she felt a horrible presence and believed feeling off and depressed whenever she went to the house. Whatever the case, weirdly, the Jamesons also owned a storage container like the type you'd find being loaded onto trucks from ships. One morning, the neighbors noticed that Sherry Lynn had graffiti all across the side of it. According to Sherry Lynn, the neighbor had poisoned her black cats, so to warn whoever she thought was doing it, she wrote, 3 cats killed today by people in this area. Witches don't like their black cat killed. And this was written in letters big enough for everyone to see. Unfortunately, supposed malevolent spirits weren't the only issues the family had. In July of 2009, Sherry Lynn lost a custody battle with her ex-husband over her son Colton. During the hearing, Colton, who was 12, apparently even said that he wanted to live with his father. He didn't like how weird his mom acted, or how she was constantly depressed. Then, in addition to losing custody of Colton, the family was having issues with someone they were letting stay at their house, a man named Kenneth Bellows. He was a handyman and a friend of the family, and he lived with them for a short while, so the Jamesons could get a little bit of extra income into the room.
Hold on,
This
go back.
was also to help Bobby with things he named Kenneth Bellows.
His name is Kenneth Bellows? Are you kidding me?
He lived with them for a short while, so the Jamesons could get a little bit of extra income by renting the room. This was also to help Bobby with things he couldn't do against his back, like lifting heavy objects. This was going well at first, but unfortunately, according to Nikki, Sherry Lynn told her that one night when Bobby was out, there had been an incident. Apparently, Kenneth sat uncomfortably close to her on the couch, got in her face, and told her he thought she was disgusting. He knew that she was part Native American, and he wanted her to know that he couldn't stand the sight of her. Sherry Lynn then stood up, went to another room, took out the family's .22 caliber pistol, and pointed it at Kenneth's head. She then told him to get out and never come back, but
Of
Kenneth
course,
called her bluff
his
and
last
said
name
she
is
was gonna
Bellows.
shoot him. So instead, she shot the fool just in front of his feet. This got Kenneth moving, and he walked out with a gun pointed at his back and never stayed at their house again. But unfortunately, without the extra income from the room, this only exacerbated the money problems they'd been having. They constantly argued as they struggled to pay bills or cover the lawyer fees for Sherry Lynn's custody battle. It didn't help that they were also suing Madison School after pulling her out of class. Making things worse still, if rumors are to be believed, around the same time Bobby had taken his father to court over the ownership of the family gas station in Oklahoma City. Bobby claimed that his father had agreed to give him half a stake in the business in return for some work he did for him. What his father was really doing, he said, was tricking him into working for nothing. According to Bobby, when he asked his father for his fair share, his father threatened to kill him and his family more than once.
Wow.
He even called his father a dangerous man who believed himself to be above the law. All of this is to say that basically the family just seemed to run into problem after problem, either with the people they knew or from their own issues. This would all finally blow up in September of 2009. Sherry Lynn, finding it impossible to take the strain of her depression, her son being taken away, the arguments with Bobby, and the overwhelming sense of paranoia she was feeling, had to be rushed to the hospital after doing something drastic.
I'm sorry, going back from what they said earlier, there's this dude, the reason I'm like, oh my god, that guy's name is Bellows, it's this emperor from the Owl House, and he's just like this creepy dude who just, oh god, he's creepy, also he has a lot of hate and stuff, so it's like, well, that's kind of odd.
This was a big turning point. The family decided they needed a change, so they came up with a plan to buy some land, take their storage container, and live inside of it off-grid, away from the stresses of the world, whether they were demons or ex-husbands. And this was a plan they kept secret. None of their friends or family, including Colton, had any idea they'd even been planning to leave. On October 7th, they set off on a 50-mile drive to the city of Red Oak in the San Juan mountain range to visit a realtor to see a 40-acre plot on the Winona Mountain. This is an area in the eastern part of Oklahoma, close to the Arkansas border. The family thought that this plot of land might be a perfect place to put their container and start a new life that would solve all of their problems. Unfortunately, this wasn't smooth either, and on the way there, they got lost and had to abandon their plans and ask for directions home. The next day, something really strange happened. Video surveillance captured Bobby and Sherry Lynn walking backwards and forwards from their truck. In the footage, they made more than a dozen trips, but truck. Other times, they walked up to it with nothing in their hands. Every now and then, they just stood still, their faces motionless, as if they were in some sort of trance. On one of the trips, they loaded a brown case into the vehicle, and sometime later, Sherry Lynn dyed Madison's hair blonde. Sometime after that, they attempted to get to Red Oak again. This time, they found their way there with the help of a GPS and met with their realtor. Bobby then asked the realtor if they could see the land alone and asked for the GPS coordinates. This didn't seem too unusual, it just seemed like they wanted to explore the place independently and get their bearings. So they took their GPS unit and walked for about 15 minutes to the spot of the mountain. It was a quiet, secluded patch of forest, rarely touched by hikers or hunters. They spent a little while looking over what could be their new home, imagining what life might be like once they moved there, and then they returned to their truck. A little while after leaving, down a road northwest of Red Oak, they got out of the truck and locked the doors. Then, on October 12th, so 4 days after they went to visit the land, one of their phones called someone. The call went to voicemail, but the family didn't leave a message. And after that unanswered phone call, there was just no sign of the Jamesons. With that said, because they were very private, the family was actually known to disappear for long periods of time. Sometimes it would be weeks before any family or friends heard from them, so at first, nobody suspected anything. In the mountains, a few people even passed the Jamesons' abandoned truck. No one thought much of it, and just thought they were another set of hikers who had driven up the trail a bit so they didn't have to walk as far. On October 17th, so over a week since the family was last seen, two hunters passed by on dirt bikes and thought they heard something coming from the truck. When they turned back to check it out, they found the family's dog Macy whimpering in the backseat, and she was so thin you could see her ribs. It was clear she'd been there for days, so the hunters decided to call the police. At first, the local sheriff thought the truck might have been stolen and had only been there for a short while, but one of the hunters said he'd seen it there for days. Macy, also being so malnourished, confirmed this. Before doing a thorough search, they checked to see if the truck would have broken down. They would find that the truck had gas and didn't seem to have been in any sort of accident and ran just fine. Next, they thoroughly searched inside and found a bunch of the family stuff, including their coats, Bobby's wallet, Sheryl's purse, cell phones, the GPS unit, and maps. There were also a couple of strange items in the truck. The first was a nasty 11-page hate letter that Sherylyn had written to Bobby. In it, she called him a loner and a hermit and listed everything she hated about him. She even wrote that she wanted a divorce. Maybe even more unusual than the letter, though, was the $32,000 in cash.
That's a lot of money.
Neither Bobby nor Sherylyn was worried.
I mean, let's go. The most amount of money I've carried on my person at any time outside my house is $1,000. Maybe I shouldn't be saying that. 1,000, right? But no more than that money. But 32 grand. That's a lot of money.
So much money. It's also
why so much?
There was no sign of the brown case that they had put in their truck in the video footage. There also didn't seem to be any sign of a struggle around the truck. Weirdly, it stopped in the middle of the road rather than being pulled over and parked, which made it look like someone or something would have forced them to stop in that spot. But otherwise, there wasn't anything you'd expect if the family had been violently abducted, like traces of blood, broken glass, or any other signs of a struggle. There was also a lot of garbage scattered around the truck, as if they decided to throw everything out of it where they stopped. The whole scene was just very strange. The police decided to use their GPS and cell phones to see if they could trace the family's last movements. Eventually, they got to where the Jamesons had stopped the truck and realized that the
I think you can repeat this over and over.
In front of rock, right where they were. There's been a lot of speculation about this picture. Madison is standing, wearing a short pink top. Her usually brown hair is dyed blonde, and her arms are folded. It's also a bit hard to read her facial expression. Some people think she looks uncomfortable, maybe even upset, while others think she's about to start laughing as her eyes and mouth are narrowed in a sort of smile. Other than this picture, the police were at a bit of a dead end in terms of leads, so they decided to begin a massive search of the area the following day. They used dogs, helicopters, and over 100 police and volunteers. The search wasn't easy. The weather was terrible, the terrain was rugged, hunting season had begun, so they had to be extra careful. Before long, the search was called off, and no trace of the family was found. That was until 4 years later. For a long time, the most popular theory about their disappearance was that they'd run away for some reason. That might explain why Sherylyn had dyed Madison's hair, but there was no trace of them. It didn't explain why the money was left behind or why it looked like someone had stopped the truck, but it gave hope to their friends and family that the three were still alive somewhere. Then, on November 16, 2013, deer hunters came across some skeletal remains in a remote area of Panola Mountain, just over 2 miles from where the Jamesons were last seen. These remains were the badly decomposing bodies of 2 adults and 1 child who were found arranged next to each other in a line. All that was left were 3 skulls, some of their bones, shoes, and some scraps of clothing. These were the remains of the Jamesons. Because of the advanced decomposition, it was impossible to work out what caused the death, but there was a small hole in Bobby's skull. The hunters who found it were sure it was a bullet hole, and at first the police agreed, but after closer investigation, they realized there was just no way to know what caused the injury. The local sheriff's department and the FBI then spent months on a thorough investigation about how they might have died and possible leads or suspects, but for a while there was still nothing. They investigated Bobby's father, who had died just 2 months after his son's family disappeared, and was determined that it couldn't have been him. He was already unwell and living in a nursing home when they vanished. The FBI also traced Kenneth, the man who was living with them, and quickly ruled him out. It was briefly entertained that maybe he had hired someone in retaliation.
P-E-L-L-O-W-S.
The FBI thought this was a bit of a stretch. This left them with 2 more theories that they wanted to follow up on. First, they had to explain the $32,000 and the weird behavior on the day the Jamesons left for Red Oak. Some people have speculated that the trance-like state, the missing brown case, and the cash point to a drug deal gone wrong. It's an area well known for mobile meth labs, which are sometimes hidden along these small trails in the forest. Given the Jamesons' odd behavior in the lead up to their disappearance, the $30,000, and the region's known link to drugs, it's not a huge stretch to think that they might have been on something. The problem with this theory is that the police found no sign of drug use at their home. On top of that, Bobby seemed to be strongly against abusing drugs. He'd even once reported a meth lab to the police anonymously, according to the people who knew him. It seems unlikely that he would get involved in something he found distasteful, or that might also implicate him if he was using. The second theory explored by authorities is the darkest. They figured maybe a disturbed Sherry Lynn or angry Bobby had taken their .22 caliber pistol, marched the family up the mountain, and then shot all of them before turning the barrel on themselves. This seems to explain the weird behavior, the hate letter, and the small hole in Bobby's skull. But there are a lot of problems with this theory as well. First, there was no gun found at the site, and they found no evidence around the bodies that anyone even fired a gun. It would have also been difficult for whoever fired last to have lined themselves up so perfectly with the other victims, let alone the fact that there's no way they could have gotten rid of the gun after the fact. So, for the police, the case was a dead end and has remained a cold case ever since. There are still some other theories, however. People have speculated that the family didn't take that last photograph at all, but instead it was someone who either followed them or they encountered in the woods. People point to Madison's folded arms and hard-to-read expression as proof she was scared when that last picture was taken. So maybe something more sinister happened to the family. And finally, it's also possible they just decided to go for a walk through the woods near what would soon be their new home, got lost, and died from exposure. Maybe it was colder than they realized, and they went too far and got lost, and then eventually lay down where they were found. In any case, it seems that the family's end was as chaotic as the rest of their story. This is one of those cases that just seems to have more questions than answers, so I'm curious to hear what all of you think. Let me know down in the comments if you have any ideas. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching.
Yep, there's a second video.
When's the last time you woke up? Good. As good as, well, this guy. Aura Ring helps you get enough sleep and enough steps.
If you're a fan of this genre and have been consuming this type of content for some time, you've undoubtedly heard about some disappearances that are just brain-breaking because of how impossible the circumstances are. There's just no shortage of instances of people walking essentially just out of view and then seemingly disappearing off the face of the earth. So in today's video, we're going to go over some of these impossible disappearances. As always, the descriptions follows. In mid-July of 1981, 14-year-old Stacey Ann Ahrens, her father George, and a small group of outdoor enthusiasts were horseback riding and camping their way through some of Yosemite National Park's most rugged and scenic backcountry. Stacey and George had been looking forward to the trip for months, and they planned on making the most of the excursion by exploring, bonding, and just generally enjoying the beautiful scenery. The trip was relatively uneventful early on, but that changed in the afternoon of July 17th, when Stacey decided to hike from their camping area to Sunrise Lake less than 2 miles away. George was too tired to join her, so instead an elderly man they were traveling with accompanied her about half the way before he also decided he was too tired and returned to camp. Stacey said goodbye and continued on alone, and that was the last time anyone ever saw her. Stacey Ann Ahrens was born to George and Carol Ahrens on September 29, 1966. She was the youngest of four in the family in Saratoga, California, and a female settlement from San Jose, which is also located just a few hours drive from Yosemite National Park to the east. When Stacey turned 14, she and her father began planning a father-daughter trip, and they officially settled on a multi-day trip along the 49-mile High Sierra Camp Loop. This trail was the best of both of them because it allowed her to travel through some of the world's most beautiful remote areas, but also gave her the safety and comfort of spending each night with other travelers in the moderately developed camp. After a normal day of riding in the afternoon of July 17, 1981, Stacey, her father, and their guide and the other travelers finally arrived at the Tulumne Meadows camping area, where they planned to get comfortable, eat a big dinner, and then turn the grill. At the same time, they were still really daylight laughing by the time they got settled in, and Stacy still had lots of energy. In this beautiful area, she just couldn't resist the allure of the nearby Sunrise Lake, which was surrounded by forests and outlined network mountains, flows, and Clark in the background. So while everyone else was relaxing and discussing the day's trip, Stacy changed into fresh clothes and swapped her hiking boots for sandals and grabbed her camera. She may have assumed her father would join, but by then he was more interested in relaxing and enjoying the scenery. He suggested that Stacy change back to her friends as she planned on hiking to the lake, but then another man, 77-year-old Joe Stewart, said that he was also looking for a short walk. So he and Stacy set off down the trail of fields, but after walking just a couple of minutes, she got a lot of energy and decided to head back. Stacy wanted to continue walking. Campers and guides actually watched as the two said goodbye to one another and then started walking in the opposite direction. While Stacy
How big
was
this field is,
the
amazing.
campground toward the afternoon into the evening. And after a little while, when Stacy didn't come back from the lake, George and Stuart started to worry. Panic hadn't quite set in yet, but as darkness fell, George and Joe began searching the camp and asking the newly arrived hikers if they'd seen anyone resembling Stacy. Then, when not a single person had seen any sign of her, they started to conclude that Stacy may be in some trouble. Maybe she'd gotten hurt on the trail and was still there, or maybe something worse had happened. Before long, George had told the rest of the group, and a full search was launched. Thankfully, by then, there were quite a few others in the campsite who were willing to fan out and look for Stacy. When small groups began walking down the trail toward the lake, it must have seemed like Stacy would be found pretty quickly, and then everyone would laugh it off as a misunderstanding. But then searchers scoured the trail and the lake area, blew whistles, and repeatedly shouted Stacy's name, but there was still no sign of her. According to her father, she had been carrying binoculars and wearing earrings and an ankle bracelet, but the only item that turned her was a camera lens found in the wooded area she must have passed through on her way to the lake. This initial search lasted well into the night, and soon after, some of the searchers started to think that she might have been abducted or attacked by a wild animal. Unfortunately, no signs of struggle were found either, which made the search even weirder. They also started to consider the possibility that she could have drowned in the lake or fallen into a hidden crevice or panicked after realizing she was lost. If she had panicked, she might have made the all-too-common mistake of trying to hike her way to safety instead of staying where she was and letting rescuers find her. Then, in her head, she could have gotten much more lost than she otherwise would have. Whatever the case, it was a long night for her father. The following morning, the National Park Service joined the search, and everyone was hopeful that with all their expertise, Stacy would be found in no time. Over the next few days, nearly 150 searchers converged on the area, about half of which were Mountain Rescue Association volunteers who collectively had decades of experience tracking people down who'd gone missing in wilderness areas. Scent dogs and helicopters were eventually called in too, but even though they went over a 5-square-mile area around the campground in Sunrise Lake, nothing new was ever found. The case was so perplexing that one volunteer apparently said that it seemed like Stacy had just disappeared off the face of the earth. As the days dragged on, everyone knew the odds of finding her alive were becoming increasingly slim. In the meantime, the Park Service had a good idea of who was in the area, since visitors and guides were required to register and obtain backcountry permits. They questioned everyone they could, so they most of Stacy along the trail and around the campground, but tragically, after 12 days, the search was officially called off. By mid-October, the trails were largely empty. With the winter weather settling in, park officials and rescuers assumed they'd find Stacy's remains the following spring after the big thaw. Unfortunately, that wouldn't be the case either. Investigators were often inundated by questions used in supposed sightings of people missing, and Stacy's case is no exception. In fact, Park Service investigators got calls from volunteers who claimed to have seen Stacy in western states like Oregon, Nevada, and Colorado. And, as is often the case with these types of cases, despite the absence of evidence. Maybe the most likely is that Stacy went to a hidden crevice while lost and hiked into the remote area of these 750 Park, and then tragically died of dehydration. Then there's also the animal attack theory. Park officials estimate that between 300 and 500 black bears live in Yosemite, but officially nobody's ever been killed or seriously injured by a bear in the park, so this theory isn't particularly likely. Officials also looked at the possibility of a mountain lion attack, because after all, mountain lions do occasionally attack humans. But if Stacy had been attacked by one or any animal for that matter, there are certainly blood, torn clothing, or signs of the struggle. And of course, the final theory is that Stacy could have been abducted, or maybe even run away. Each of these theories doesn't seem particularly likely either, because of how remote the area is. In any case, whatever happened to Stacy and Eris, she may have been within a stone's throw of the searchers in the early part of the search, which makes things even more frustrating. As a result of this, it's often asked why she hadn't responded to rescuers' shouts or whistles if she'd been in such close proximity to them. fact is that experienced search and rescue personnel experience this phenomenon all the time. In the wilderness, unfortunately, sound rarely behaves like we think it should. In any case, adding another layer of mystery to her disappearance, David Paulides of the Missing 411 fame apparently filed a number of Freedom of Information requests with the Park Service to get information on Stacy's case, but each of his requests was denied. In the Park Service's defense, they've made a PDF file available online for anyone interested to look into the case, but the file only includes a few official documents, and otherwise, it's mostly just old Forest Service maps, grainy photographs, and newspaper clippings that don't shed any new light on the case. Stacy was the only person to have ever disappeared from the Sunrise Lake area.
We all like doing things
Mm.
hard.
So that's what's going missing.
Take 'em to track.
Actually shows you switching. Acceleration button. The only bad thing about used items in this game is that they break faster, if I'm not wrong. It's a nice little thing right there, a little truck. Yeah. I might leave like the extra 3,000 in there. bars down there. Maybe it's like, so that way the trailer's tip. It's a really good trailer. $260,000 soybeans. Oh, I love this. I love it. I like this sound. Yes, this sound. Ready for it? $90,000. Man, 2 cars full of soybeans and 2 harvests? I think that's some good. Ready? And there it goes. We're gonna send this sucker now, we're gonna sell it. Sell our soybeans. Ready for that big money? $600. We got a mil. Wow. We know. Yeah, if we would have gotten the extra pit, we probably would have gotten like 1 mil. Or very, very close to 1 mil. Wow. However, I do think we need to upgrade. Sadly, I am thinking about selling this tractor. I want to sell the trailer, but I think if I use my new auger trailer that I'm really wanting, I doubt I'd be able to fit it into that. Like, other places selling it would work, but I don't think I'd be able to take the trailer. The trailer is pretty good. I think I'll keep the trailer for a while. I will definitely buy a truck and buy trailers because they have like 75,000, 75 cubic meters versus this thing has like 52. So within a few, probably like within, if I kept farming like this, within a few harvests, I'd start investing in trucking. However, after I get trucks, maybe a little bit more equipment, that's when I'd probably start saving up for my facility. This place is nice, but it does need a massive overhaul. Sorry, tractor. I'm not gonna sell the OG one. No. So it's nice having this tractor, but I need something with a little bit more power. Sorry. $1.1 million! And up there it is. There's my fast track. Goodbye, girl. I enjoyed you so much. But now we need to get... We could buy a quad track. But... yeah, we could really walk out of the store with this. I really... like, what's it called? Even with the best upgrades, I could walk out right now. Easy peasy. Oh God, I'm in a dilemma. Man, it's like the quad track. The only reason I don't like the quad track is that it kind of just steers weird. I don't know. You know what? Whatever. We're buying the beast. The infamous, the legendary, the powerful Case Steiger Quad Track, equipped with a 620 engine. This massive tractor is a tank, a force to be rivaled with. Oh, when they redid the sounds, this sounds so cool. This isn't the weakness is that the steering is a little bit complicated, But the speed is not that good. But the pro is that this thing is a beast. Whatever you throw at it, it will pull. And it will not like go. No, it is the most powerful tractor in the game. And we're gonna slap on a purchase, $150,000. We're gonna slap on Auger Wagon with that too. So now this will hold a lot more stuff. That's so satisfying. It's a little bit weird. You have to get used to this. So. And then we have $300,000. So we barely lost any money. I mean, you know what? Maybe I'm getting a little bit cocky here. Oh, this thing is so badass. What? It's even got upgraded display from the last game, too. Oh, this thing sounds so mean, too. These are some of the most powerful... This is like probably one of the most powerful tractors in the world. Like top 10. Maybe top like 5 or 3. This is a force to be trifled with. This tractor is a big boy tractor. And this is a good tank. I could have bought the other one, but I like this size of this one way better. It doesn't take that long to actually unfold the pipe on this. Basically, if you don't know what these auger wagons do, this is not... Yes. Dude, this thing sounds so good. Okay, now let's look at something. Trailers, if we go here, we just go all the way to the right. Let's see, this would cost 138 plus the trucks. I'd want this truck. This costs... How expensive can we make this? 150,000. 150 plus 138, that's like $280,000. That would, but like, you know, let's be generous. Let's actually just do that right there. That's 120. Are you serious? That's a steal. Say 1, 2. Now, our question is, do we want this? Do we... I like it the case. We're gonna buy a truck. Oh, yeah. I mean, who cares? We don't want this sleeper. Oh, this is fast. You know what? Actually, speaking of quote-unquote running out of money, I like this. But by the way, but I just don't like the front. I like this front because it's a lot more squarey. You can see the tranny too, look! You can see the transmission just spinning. I love when you can watch the transmissions rotate over any end. Oh, No, it's not like a tractor icon on the top. My sister's boyfriend would love this because he actually works on these trucks. I think this very specific model of truck he works on. You know what? Because we bought this, we could. Why couldn't I bought this? I could have bought this, but I want the tracks, and those break more. I think the used items break more. Man, that harvest was very good. Because now we're really getting good stuff. Like, that's 75,000. I had to say this. You know what? Remember when I said I'd keep that trailer for a while? I might actually get rid of it. I could get rid of this tractor, but it's like, nah, I'm gonna keep it, you know? Because, like, I got so much hours on it. This tractor is my baby. I'm sorry, trailer, but you gotta go. Yeah. Oh, yeah, this tractor. This tractor is worthless. $65,000. And I spent, like, let's see. This is it. It was worth it lost $220,000 of value. Wow. That is a lot of value gone. Might as well keep the tractor. I have such pride in the very first things I buy. I'll tell you that. And goodbye. Sorry. It's time for you to go. I loved you, trailer. Also, yes, this is a vehicle. Okay, I need someone to drive my... Great job. I want... I need you to go right here. There we go. Thank you. Meanwhile, I have no trailer. Okay, can you just steer right? That's all you gotta do. Okay. Now all I gotta do is go over here and buy this trailer. Yeah, 51. What? Wow, this trailer actually has less storage space than this one that I bought, right? 52 square meters. This was like point. Yeah. Anyway, this one has 75 square units. Slap that red on there. So the ribbon color is black. And yeah, we're gonna buy this bad boy. And we still have 150,000, which is a pretty okay amount of money to have. We're not, like, remember, I consider below $50,000 like where you like start going broke. We have 150,000, which we can't do that much with in this game, but it's enough money that it can cushion us between. Like, what's it called? Like, if we were starting to lose money, we can basically turn ourselves around. But now, the reason I sold that is now I can basically go about 10 mile an hour faster selling my goods, and I can transport 20 cubic meters of harvest extra when I transport my material. So this trucking will probably save me a bunch. Well, not probably. It will save me a bunch of time. Is that? That's corn? It feels like this corn gets taller if you get in the cab. By the way, if you want to know something, this is the same, this semi is basically really closely related to, of course, Mack in, Cars. The reason that, that semi's name is Mack is because that's the brand, is Mack. Got the gang together. Man, I want to upgrade. Next, I think I'd probably upgrade my wind turbine, but... Oh my god, I don't even have a wind turbine. I'm so... Where'd I even get that from? Anyway. Look how you see that giant wither beacon just in the sky. Might have to get off here in a few minutes. I think you could actually unfold the header when it was connected to the back of your Combine in 19. Was so weird. That stupid sign is so annoying. I might have a system. I might like take like let's say these giant fields, combine them. These giant fields, combine them. An idea like month 1, I'd harvest and plant this field. Month 2, harvest and plant this giant mega field. Month 3, I might harvest and plant this giant mega field. Month 4, plant that. And then what's it called? If I've had like 2 more mega fields, like maybe like harvest and plant like this and this, and on 5, and then make it. I don't know. Now we have a semi and a quad track, and the best trailer, and a really, really good auger. I mean, we're going good right now. Maybe I should probably have $600,000 in order to get that. I feel like this has an advantage. Sounds way better than the contract in the other games. I call all my stuff is just going red. the idea. I'll show you. It's the idea of a... Why would I want the auger wagon, you might ask? Oh, is the reason you want an auger wagon is that I think they can traverse over rough terrain way better than these trailers can. So therefore, you go to the auger wagon, instead of having to go all the way back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, with like a trailer, how I usually do, is that you basically take the auger wagon and, oh, he's overshooting is welcome. You take the auger wagon and you would unload it off the combine, and then you bring it over because that thing is way better for the rough terrain. So you bring it over, and then the combine loads it, and that thing can take a lot of loads for this combine. Take it over and you unload it onto that load it off onto that semi, and I can truck it back and forth. Dude, 200,000 or 200 cubic meters. Yeah, so according here to like r/super, it's going. This sun says an auger wagon can also save time by continuing to unload harvesters while the tipper trailer is delivering product. Because I want you to keep an eye on something, right? This combine can hold 14,400 liters of soybean. Let's keep watching. Once it climbs to 14,400, it's going to get full. Combines actually do not have a lot of storage space when it comes to grain. I'll show you that. Just gotta let it fill up. This one fills up a little quick. So yeah, the tipper could Yeah. Here's the problem with the combines is that, yeah, look, 14,400 liters of soybean. When you really dumb it down the math, these harvesters fill up very quickly, and that's their biggest downfall. However, here comes in the auger wagon. The auger wagon can hold a lot more. So right now, theoretically, somebody could be in there trucking all my material back and forth, all my soybeans back and forth, right? Meanwhile, what's it called? When I'm off delivering product, right, I can't go back to my combine and fill it back up or unload it if it gets full. However, with this auger wagon, I can finally do that. Oh man, I miss auger wagons. Look at that. 14,000 liters. A full combine only filled up not in a fit. So I could fill this combine 5 times. And that's 5 like 5 and a tenth of a time. So roughly 5 times, right? To fill that auger wagon. Like let's say I take the auger wagon. Like let's say everybody's doing their own thing, like, right? Every tractor you see on screen right now is doing its own thing. Everybody's working. That auger wagon would go to my trailer and unload the stuff. Meanwhile, the trailer and the truck go off and deliver, sell the product, blah blah blah. You get the point. Meanwhile, the auger wagon is still relatively close to the combine to unload its load after it's full. So therefore, and there you go. Yeah, that's why the auger wagon is really useful. You can actually guard your little combine a lot better, and you can save yourself a lot more time. And now that I go 10 more miles an hour and I carry 20,000 more units of soybeans. Oh wait, a cubic meter means 1,000 soybeans. Hey, I'm gonna have to take a break right now. You know, I'll be back later. Bye, guys.